Chapter 1542. Attention, all units. Attention, all units. The 10th tier orc in the north of the city is heading toward the palace instead of the west. He's not heading toward the west. Camilla's voice suddenly sounded from the bat on Meg's shoulder. Are we going back to the palace directly? Meg frowned. This was a little different from what he had planned. Maybe they've already realized our target. Elizabeth waved her hand, and countless tiny ice crystals flew in all directions. A square ice screen appeared in front of everyone, and various scenes appeared on the ice screen. It was just like the big screen in the surveillance room. From the various scenes on the screen, they could see that the level of defense was increasing rapidly. The patrolling guards had also clearly become denser, and the entire palace seemed to have entered alert mode. Meg was surprised by Elizabeth's showy move, but he also nodded in agreement with her judgment. Everyone knew that everyone's target tonight was Ferdinand because Ferdinand was in Gary's hands, and the initiative was in Gary's hands. As for the commotion in the north, south, and west of the city, it was to make him panic so that they could take advantage of the situation. However, Gary might have seen through their plan now, so he simply ignored their provocation and chose to guard the palace and Ferdinand. This is difficult. Barbara kicked a small rock in front of her, and looked around. Then, where do I need to set up the teleportation portal? If there are 2 10th tier orcs, do we still need to try? Everyone frowned. This situation was indeed a little troublesome. That fellow won't be able to return to the palace. Irina's voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. What a confident declaration. However, because she was Irina, it seemed to be a matter of course. Let's go. We should set off too. Meg walked out of the tree hole. If there was only one Gary, they could still give it a try. Even if the worst happened, he was confident that he could get everyone to retreat into the teleportation portal and leave at the risk of being exposed. He hadn't really tested the upper limit of the peak of the 9th tier yet. Elizabeth, you're in charge of monitoring and guiding the way. Avoid all patrolling orcs and enter the palace in the quietest way possible. Meg looked at Elizabeth and said. The method of receiving images through the icicles was simply too practical. It was equivalent to turning most of the palace into their home ground. All right. Elizabeth nodded and slid her finger on the ice curtain. The 2-meter-long ice curtain quickly shrank until it was only half a meter square and floated to her left. She took the lead and walked forward. Keep up, don't make any noise. Meg said to everyone, letting them go first while he was in charge of bringing up the rear. With Elizabeth's guidance, the group easily avoided all the patrolling guards and quietly entered the interior of the palace. Although this palace in the Fork tribe couldn't be compared to the Roth Empire's royal palace, it was still considered a large-scale castle. It was built with black rocks of equal size, and had a huge space inside. It was separated into many areas by intersecting corridors, and there were many rooms. After Meg and the rest entered the castle, they started to check the rooms one by one according to the information they got from the Grey Temple. The entire Fork tribe was shrouded in a dangerous and tense atmosphere. This also caused many people to be awake even though it was already late at night, and caused some trouble for their search. Barbara put her hands down slowly, and softly said, the palace maids in this room have all fainted. They will be fine after sleeping for a while, and waking up tomorrow morning. Everyone accidentally entered a palace maid's bedroom. Luckily, they managed to subdue all of them before they screamed in terror. Meg confirmed their current location, and asked Barbara, are you sure no one will wake up tonight? I've applied a second vibration curse. If anyone wakes up early, they will be knocked out again. Barbara nodded confidently. Then, you can set up a teleportation portal here. This location is almost the same distance from our 3 targets. Once something happens, our evacuation time will be close. This is the best place to evacuate. Meg looked around, and pointed at the empty space in the middle of the dormitory. After that, he said to MIA, you will be in charge of assisting Barbara. Yarbemia nodded. She also knew that she wouldn't be able to provide much help in the battle. All right. Barbara nodded. She poured out a pile of materials for setting up a teleportation portal from her spatial bracelet. There was an extremely high requirement for the materials and the method of setting up a teleportation portal. The shorter the activation time, the higher the precision required. Ordinary advanced formation masters would have to spend a few days to set it up. However, as a genius formation master who could repair ancient teleportation portals, this level of teleportation portal was nothing to Barbara. After working at Mammoth for a few months, the world might have forgotten that she was the princess of the Moon Nation, the youngest advanced space magic caster, and a genius formation master, Barbara Nubalu. These are the 3 places we need to explore tonight. They include a royal secret dungeon, a possible dungeon, and a treasure trove. Meg pointed at the 3 marked points on the map. He looked at Elizabeth, Yarbemia, and Gina, and said, "We will be divided into 2 groups. Amy and I will explore the possible dungeon, while Elizabeth will bring Gina to investigate the secret dungeon. Remember, try not to get into a fight. We have to confirm Ferdinand's location before alerting the enemy. Otherwise, the plan will fail. Once we trigger the mechanism in the palace or get exposed, return to the palace maid's dormitory immediately. We have to leave before the enemy's 10th tier powerhouse finds us. Safety first," Meg said seriously as he looked into Elizabeth's eyes. "All right." Elizabeth looked into Meg's eyes and nodded slightly. She looked at Amy, and then at Meg. She hesitated for a moment, and said, "Maybe it's more reasonable to change the team." Everyone's gaze was also on Meg. Although they vaguely knew that his strength was not bad, he was not a real knight, after all. They were already a little surprised that he was personally taking part in and commanding the operation today. Now that he was going to personally bring Amy to investigate, they couldn't help but feel worried. Meg also realized that he seemed to be too arrogant, which didn't suit his elegant and kind restaurant owner persona. He smiled, and said, "Don't worry about me. It's only a warehouse over there, and we're not sure if there's a secret dungeon. If there is, I'll return immediately to seek help. Be careful." Elizabeth knew that Meg wasn't someone who would joke about Amy's safety. She pondered for a moment, and then left with Gina. "Let's go, Miss Amy. It's time for us to set off." Meg helped Amy tidy up her black night suit, and then held her little hand as they left the palace maid's dormitory. The place they were going to was a real dungeon. According to the Grey Temple's intelligence, there were a few important prisoners locked up there, but they weren't sure if Ferdinand was one of them. "Assassin Miss Amy, ready," Amy replied softly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She's really the same as her mother. She just wants to see the world burn. Meg couldn't help but laugh in his heart. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1543. Those foolish fellows. They keep thinking that they can overthrow me and establish a legitimate fork tribe as long as they save you. Gary looked at the skinny young orc sitting opposite him with a mocking smile. One must always have a dream. The young orc laughed self-deprecatingly before he started coughing violently again. His skinny body was hunched over, and a few veins were popping out on his forehead due to the pain. "To a certain extent, I should thank you." Gary looked at that young orc with pity. "That seat originally belonged to you, but you will never be able to sit there for the rest of your life. You know that I never have any extravagant hopes." The young orc raised his head to look at Gary. "You will die tomorrow, and I will give you a dignified death. Take it as my last gift to you." Gary stood up, and walked out of the stone temple. The door to the stone temple closed slowly, and the sound of footsteps disappeared. The young orc, who was originally hunched over and coughing in pain, straightened his back slowly. The pain and disheveled look on his face disappeared without a trace. He looked in the direction of the door with a slight smirk on his face. "Uncle, I hope that the conferring gift I give you tomorrow won't shock you too much." A soft murmur reverberated in the secret chamber. "Amy, there are 30 guards in the prison in front, including 1 9th tier orc and 2 7th tier orcs. I will open that door, and we only have 30 seconds to kill or subdue all the guards and close the door again. Can you do it?" Meg stopped at the side of a long corridor with Amy. He slowly took out a small mirror and glanced at the situation in the corridor. 2 orc guards were standing at the door with vigilance. Behind them were 2 thick and heavy stone doors. They had been standing here for a while. The patrolling guards had a 10-minute interval between going back and forth, and the footsteps of the latest patrol team had not completely faded away. Millimeter HM. Amy nodded hard. Very good. Now, I need you to use ice element magic to freeze those 2 orcs. It's best if you can maintain their current posture and expressions, Meg continued. Okay. A magic staff appeared in Amy's hand. She began to chant a spell silently. Thin, almost invisible threads of frost rushed toward the 2 orcs at the end of the corridor from all directions. Did you hear the commotion outside? Is someone attacking our tribe? An orc asked softly. Don't worry. Our Fork tribe is the 2nd largest orc tribe, and Chief Gary is even more powerful. No one can break into the palace, another orc said with a relaxed expression. That's true. The orc who spoke earlier chuckled and suddenly shivered. He muttered, Don't you feel cold all of a sudden? A little. I think someone forgot to close the door again. Another orc nodded. At this moment, an unstable domain of extreme cold formed in the space where the 2 orcs were. The 2 orcs were frozen into ice sculptures before they could even react. Done. Amy put down her magic caster's staff, and the cold aura slowly dissipated. She said excitedly, I've frozen them. Let's go. Mag looked at the 2 orcs who froze at the same time, and brought Amy to the prison at the end of the corridor. The 2 5th-tier orcs guarding the door stood in front of the stone door. However, one couldn't tell that they had been frozen from the outside. It was enough to fool the patrol team that passed by a dozen meters away. Amy, after entering this door, you'll be in charge of slowing down their movements and stopping them from making any noise. Leave the rest to me. Meg pressed his hand gently on a dent above the stone door. A bluish-green light lit up, and circled around Meg's hand. The stone door began to open inwards slowly. All right. I will do my best to cooperate with Father. Amy nodded obediently. She raised her magic caster's staff again, and began to chant softly at the same time. The highest level alert order had already been sent to every corner of the palace. The only publicly established prison in the palace naturally received the order too. Warden Yuri kicked the jailer who was dozing off against the wall, and woke up all the prisoners in the prison with his scolding. Only then did he feel a little better. There were many prisoners locked up in this prison. Most of them were ministers who were loyal to the former chief, as well as the chief's relatives who had yet to be executed. There were no less than 100 of them. What made Yuri feel relieved was that most of these fellows would be executed tomorrow. As long as they were dead, he wouldn't have to be on tenterhooks every day. He could have a good night's sleep. Stay alert. After tonight, I'll bring everyone to Flower Lane to drink and play with women, Yuri said loudly. Such encouragement immediately received a warm response from the group of animals. A smile appeared on Yuri's face. Gary had promised him that he would also be conferred a title during the conferring ceremony tomorrow, and he wouldn't have to continue staying in this dark prison anymore. Back then, he made a small mistake, and was demoted by the former chief to be the warden of this prison. He stayed there for 50 years, and every time he left, he would need the chief's approval. Although he was a warden, he was actually not much different from a prisoner. Hence, when Gary found him, he agreed to stand on his side almost without much thought. On the day Gary raised his army, he was the one who released those sinners from the tribe from the prison. He used their strength to tear open the palace's defense line and open the palace gates to welcome Gary, Indiana. Yuri felt that that was probably the best decision he had made in his life. He didn't want to live like a rat in the glorious underground of the palace anymore. Catcher, catcher, the prison gates slowly opened inwards, and everyone looked in the direction of the gates in surprise. Apart from the warden, only the chief and his envoy could open the prison gates directly from the outside. Could the chief have some orders in the middle of the night? However, when everyone's gazes landed on the 2 figures standing at the gates, one big and one small, they were all stunned. Do it. The 2 cold words came out of Meg's mouth. His body had already shot out like a cheetah, and crashed into Yuri, who was standing in the middle of the tunnel. Amy raised the magic caster's staff in her hand high, and chanted, Frost, listen to my command. Freeze everything. The chill descended instantly, and white frost spread rapidly from the ground. The air seemed to have become stagnant because of the cold. Enemy. As Yuri retreated, he opened his mouth to give a warning. Almost at the same time, he reached out to pull out the long saber at his waist. Chapter 1544. Ding. The crisp sound of metal clashing could be heard. Yuri's long saber, which he had just raised halfway, shattered into countless shards. Under his horrified gaze, a sword slashed straight at his face. Fresh blood and an unknown liquid splattered everywhere. Yuri's body, which was missing half of his head, fell slowly. He didn't even have time to utter a second word. Warden. All the prison guards looked at this scene in disbelief. The number one swordsman of the Fork tribe was killed without even being able to withstand a single blow from his opponent. However, they didn't have time to scream because that man in black didn't stop after killing Yuri. Instead, he dashed toward the others in the tunnel at an even faster speed. The warden was killed in a single strike, but that didn't completely extinguish their desire to live. The sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard, and at the same time, the sound of magic chanting could be heard. This was the dungeon directly below the palace, after all. As long as they made a big enough commotion and let the chief sense it, that intruder would be killed no matter who it was. And no matter how powerful that man in black was, he was only one person. However, the temperature in the prison seemed to have dropped significantly. The air became a little stagnant as if it had been frozen. Everyone's movements also became a little inconvenient. Right at this moment, the man in black who was dashing forward suddenly threw out the longsword in his hand. The long sword, which was glowing coldly under the light of the oil lamp, flew out with a whoosh. It circled around the prison's corridor at a terrifying speed before landing in Meg's hand again. Blood dripped slowly from the tip of the sword, and the heavy stone door behind them also closed slowly. At this moment, those prison guards' eyes widened in horror as they slowly fell to the ground and lost all signs of life. So powerful. Amy looked at Meg with her mouth slightly agape. Her little face was full of shock and admiration. "Father, is that a flying sword?" Amy couldn't help but ask curiously. "It's a type of sword technique," Meg answered with a smile. After that, he didn't say anything else. Instead, he took a torch from the wall at the side and walked toward those prisons. The commotion caused by the fight and the smell of blood in the air woke the prisoners up. Those prison guards who treated them like pigs and dogs and beat them as they wished were all killed. Has that bastard Gary been executed? I knew that the Kingslayer would never become the chieftain. Lord Flurkin would never agree. The prisoners rushed to the railing, unable to hide their excitement. "I'm here to save young Master Ferdinand." "Is he here?" Meg said in a deep voice. The prison was silent for a while before someone exclaimed, "Is the outside world still under Gary's control?" Panic spread again, and some people even began to ask Meg for help. "Is young Master Ferdinand imprisoned here?" Meg ignored the orcs who were calling for help, and repeated stiffly. An elderly orc squeezed his way to the front, and earnestly said, "Young Master Ferdinand is not locked up here. Sir, please save him. The rise and fall of our Fork tribe depends on him. If he dies, the old chief's legacy will also be broken." "Isn't there still Princess Connie?" Meg asked with a frown. "Young Master Ferdinand is the only choice. Princess Connie is not the successor, and can't become the chief." That elderly man shook his head. "Since he's not here, then I'll pay my respects." Meg sheathed his sword disinterestedly, and tossed the torch aside. He then turned and walked toward the stone door with Amy. "Save me. Please save us." All the orcs began to cry for help frantically. They had already heard countless warnings about being executed the next day. Now, it was as if they had grabbed onto a life-saving straw after falling into the water. "Make any more noise, and I'll kill all of you too," Meg said coldly. The prison instantly fell into a dead silence. The stone door opened slowly, and Meg walked out with Amy before closing the stone door again. The two ice sculptures were still standing at the door. If nothing went wrong, they would only discover what was happening in the prison when the prison guards changed shifts. Point 2 has been eliminated. "There's no dungeon," Meg said in a low voice as he switched on the walkie-talkie. Point 1 has been eliminated. There are only 3 orcs locked up in the dungeon. Their appearance is very different from Ferdinand's. Elizabeth's voice also sounded from the walkie-talkie very quickly. Let's gather at point 3. Meg held Amy's hand and turned sideways into the passageway at the side. A pair of patrolling guards quickly walked past them. Who are you? How dare you create trouble in the Fork tribe? Basil, who was injured in many places, looked around with an aggrieved and furious expression. Just as he was on his way back to the palace, he was attacked by an unknown fellow. The other party was simply too fast and too powerful. So much so that he couldn't even see the other party's face clearly after a few exchanges. Many of the stone palaces around him had collapsed. The shattered rocks were the best evidence of the intense battle. There was no answer. The only response he got was a huge rock that was half the height of a human. Basil waved the black iron rod in his hand and smashed that huge rock into pieces. Right at this moment, a slender leg kicked out from the dust and sent Basil flying. Bastard! Do you dare to come out and have a fair battle with me? Basil jumped out from the pile of rocks aggrievedly and roared at the sky. The surroundings fell into silence again. Only the leaves rustling in the cold wind could be heard as if they were mocking him. Who are you? How dare you kill a member of the Fork tribe? Daryl and Kurt blocked Rex from both sides and shouted at him. Is it important who I am? Rex laughed self-deprecatingly. It's not important now. No matter who you are, you have to die here tonight. Daryl raised his magic caster's staff and began to chant a spell. A dark blue glow started to gather at the tip of the magic caster's staff. Kurt also drew out his dual blades and rode the magic beast under him as he charged towards Rex. This sounds a little familiar. Rex shook his head. Instead of retreating, he charged towards Kurt. He didn't see Kurt's weapon and simply raised his hand to punch that black magic beast under him. The tip of the blade almost brushed past his scalp, and his iron fist landed squarely on that magic beast's head. Accompanied by the crisp sound of bones breaking, Kurt, who was sitting on the magic beast, and that magic beast with a caved-in head flew backward at the same time. Hairless monk! Daryl suddenly shouted in horror as he looked at Rex. It's actually him. Kurt, who barely managed to stabilize himself after landing, couldn't hide the shock on his face when he heard that. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Chapter 1545. The Hairless Monk. He was a taboo existence. He was a half-orc born from the mating between an orc and a human, and eventually wiped out the Urba tribe. This incident had once caused a huge commotion on the Norland continent, and all the orc tribes knew about it. The Urba tribe was once one of the top 10 orc tribes, but it was wiped out overnight. It was a horrifying sight. It was said that many of the orcs who witnessed the tragedy committed suicide after going back. There were many versions of the legend about that night that were still circulating in the Twilight Forest. The Hairless Monk, Rex's infamy, also spread across the Norland continent after that night. Back then, the Urba tribe had 2 10th-tier orcs, and many 8th-tier and 9th-tier orcs. Rex was able to wipe out the entire Urba tribe without leaving a single survivor. He was so powerful that he was placed in a very high position. However, after the end of the tribal war, the experts of the various clans joined forces to subdue him and imprison him in the Bastei prison. At this moment, he should be in the impenetrable prison of the Bastei prison. Why would he appear here? Daryl and Kurt looked at Rex cautiously. They had once heard that the Fork tribe seemed to have some ties with Rex. However, Rex's infamy back then had wiped out all news related to him. Why did Rex suddenly appear at the Fork tribe on the night before Gary's conferring ceremony? Of course, what was more shocking was, the Hairless Monk actually grew hair. Hairless Monk, the Fork tribe has no feud with you. Why did you massacre the warriors and people of our tribe? Do you want to massacre another tribe and make the whole world your enemy? Daryl shouted with a deep voice. A secret letter flew out of his hand, and flew in the direction of the palace under the cover of a dark grey light. Only you are allowed to kill, but I'm not allowed to kill. This doesn't make sense, Rex said calmly as he looked at Daryl. Although I don't know how you escaped from the Bastei prison, Don't think that the Fork tribe is as easy to bully as the Erba tribe. If you don't give us an explanation today, don't even think about leaving this place, Kurt shouted sternly. His hand that was holding the sword was trembling slightly. Although the punch didn't land on him, he could feel the terrifying power behind it. His mount had been killed by a single punch. I'm not here to kill today. I'm here to save people. Lex looked at Kurt and said calmly, if saving someone requires killing someone, it should be a little different. Who do you want to save? Daryl asked in a deep voice. Same as them. Lex glanced at the orcs in black who had yet to disperse. Daryl and Kurt exchanged glances, and their expressions became a little solemn. Hairless monk, I'm warning you again. This is the Fork tribe's internal affairs. You have no right to interfere, Kurt shouted. Facing such an opponent, even though there were two of them, they still didn't have much confidence in keeping the hairless monk here. The information had already been sent to the palace. As long as Gary or Basil arrived, it would be 3 against 1, and they would be confident of capturing him. If they could execute the hairless monk during the conferring ceremony tomorrow, it would be something that would greatly increase the Fork tribe's prestige. There would be representatives from various tribes coming to observe the ceremony tomorrow, but the Fork tribe was already in such a state. If they couldn't even capture the troublemaker, they really wouldn't have the face to receive their guests tomorrow. Lex wasn't in a hurry to make a move, either. He only continued to walk along the long street. 2 of the 4 10th-tier orcs had already arrived, and his goal was to attract another one. Hairless monk. Gary looked at the secret letter that Daryl sent back with a frown. Isn't this fellow in Chaos City? Why would he suddenly appear here? Could the rumors back then be true? Gary put down the secret letter, and asked, where is Basil? Report. Lord Basil was attacked by an unknown opponent on his way back to the palace. I'm afraid he won't be able to get out in a short period of time. A guard walked in quickly. An unknown opponent. You didn't see clearly who it was. Gary's frown deepened. Yes. It was too fast. No one could see clearly who attacked Lord Basil, including Lord Basil himself. That guard's forehead was covered in cold sweat. A hairless monk and an unknown 10th-tier powerhouse. I didn't expect that disappointing nephew of mine to be so popular. Gary stood up slowly, and paced around the hall with a gloomy expression. A black-clothed strategist at the side stepped forward, and said, Chief, our Fork tribe is in ruins after this battle. If we don't leave anyone behind, I'm afraid our prestige will be weakened when the other tribes come to observe the ceremony tomorrow, and people will think that we can be easily bullied. If you want to ruin my plans, then you have to be prepared to pay the price. Gary stopped in his tracks, and his gaze turned cold. He waved his hand, and said, Bring me my treasured saber. Let me meet that hairless monk. Gary quickly put on his gold and silver armor, and strode out with a saber that was embedded with gemstones in his hands. That black-clothed strategist stood at the entrance of the hall for a while, and only turned to walk to that huge chair after he saw Gary dashing out of the door on his horse. I haven't been home for just a few months, and it has changed so much. Connie walked lightly in the palace. Her pinkish-white beast ears were trembling slightly. Her sharp sense of hearing could help her avoid approaching enemies in advance. She was like a black cat that moved at night, and moved silently in the palace. However, she was originally full of confidence, but her expression was a little solemn now. The familiar yet unfamiliar scene made her recall that night where fire and blood intertwined uncontrollably. She was still asleep when she was woken up, and then escorted to retreat in a daze. The rebel army massacred everyone in the palace crazily, including the little maidservant who grew up with her. Her father was besieged to death in order to let her leave. There were also those guards who charged at the rebel army without fear of death. Those memories that she tried so hard to throw to the back of her mind finally surged up again. The dim passageway became a little cold. Connie couldn't help but quicken her pace as she rummaged through the places that she thought her brother might be locked up. However, none of those places that she used to hide in when she was young had her brother locked up. Grandmother's room. Connie stopped at the end of the long corridor. She looked at the room in front of her that was in a state of disrepair. She hesitated for a while before dashing into the room. The huge room seemed to have been ransacked. Those beautiful porcelain pieces that her grandmother carefully collected were all shattered into pieces. Those wooden shelves that were used to place the porcelain pieces were all taken away, including all the valuables in the room. Her shoes stepped on the shattered porcelain pieces without making any sound. Connie looked around the empty room. Her gaze landed on the half-torn cloth that was still hanging on the beam, and her eyes reddened immediately. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1546. Little Connie, you must go to the outside world in the future and meet the people outside. Why? Because the outside world is much more interesting than the tribe. The people outside are also much more interesting. But I'm afraid I'll get lost. Don't be afraid. You'll meet that person who can always find the way for you one day. When that time comes, you must hold on to him tightly. Why? Is he a thief? He. Yes, he's a thief. A thief who steals hearts. The cold moonlight was cut into gentle lines by the window and landed on the floor that was covered with broken porcelain pieces. Connie seemed to see that grandmother who hugged her and sat by the window, telling her about the outside world and counting the stars. She still hadn't found that person who could always find the way for her, but her grandmother was already gone. The broken porcelain pieces on the floor were so sharp that she couldn't see the warm and elegant appearance of this room anymore. That bunch of robbers had robbed everything that they could. Connie walked to the broken wardrobe and bent down to pick up a piece of porcelain that was slightly intact. However, her gaze landed on a very small piece of cloth that was sticking out from the bottom of the wardrobe. This is. Connie reached out to grab that piece of grey cloth doubtfully. She lifted the wardrobe and pulled it out. Dust flew up, and 2 lines of words were scribbled on an irregular piece of cloth with dark red bloodstains. The faint smell of blood had yet to dissipate completely. However, Connie didn't care about that at this moment. She stared at the words written on the cloth with shock and disbelief in her eyes. Connie, stay away from Ferdinand. Stay away from him. Go far away. Don't come back to this place. Although the handwriting was messy, Connie could tell that it was her grandmother's handwriting at a glance. Blood soaked the cloth. What made her grandmother, who was usually calm and composed, leave such a line of words on the cloth as her last words? Connie looked at that line of words and suddenly fell into a huge fear. Ferdinand. Her brother. Her closest brother in this world. But now, her grandmother wanted her to stay away from him, and stay far away from the Fork tribe. Why was that? What was the deeper meaning behind this sentence? Why did her grandmother want her to stay away from her brother? Connie didn't know the answer. Looking at the dark red words, his body grew colder. She tried her best to run out of the twilight forest, and ran all the way to Chaos City. She fell down countless times, and wanted to sleep forever. Her only hope was to survive, and come back to save her big brother when she became stronger. Now, she had become strong and had received the help of her friends. She returned to the tribe and the palace once again. She was perhaps only one step away from saving her brother. However, she found her grandmother's last words here. In this world, there was no one who treated him better than his grandmother. Even his father and mother did not treat him as well as his grandmother. Therefore, she couldn't ignore this suicide note, which was specially written for her. Right, the diary. Grandmother's diary. Connie suddenly thought of an important clue. Her grandmother had the habit of keeping a diary. Ever since she could remember things, she had noticed that her grandmother would keep a diary occasionally. Perhaps she could find some relevant information in there. Her diary. Connie looked around the room, and quickly walked to where the wooden bed was originally placed. She swept away the broken porcelain on the floor, and knocked on the floor. She heard a different sound coming from under a wooden board. She reached out with her sharp nails, and hooked that wooden board up. There was a small secret compartment under the wooden board, and there were 3 thick, dark yellow goatskin books wrapped in fine silk. They weren't found. Connie was elated. She carefully took out the 3 thick diaries from the secret compartment. She had seen her grandmother take out these diaries when she was young, but she never let her see what was written inside. The bloody letter that her grandmother left behind made her lose her ability to think. She didn't know what to do. If she didn't do anything, her brother might be executed tomorrow. However, she believed that her grandmother would never harm her. She had to have a motive for leaving this bloody letter for her when the riot was happening. Or rather, she saw or knew something, and wanted her to avoid it. She had to find the answer. Otherwise, she couldn't convince herself to leave and watch her brother be executed. The 3 goatskin diaries were very thick, and the serial numbers were written in chronological order. Connie picked up the diary with the serial number 1. She sat cross-legged by the window, and flipped to the first page. There was a line of words written in young handwriting on the title page. Father said, "Memories will fade, but words can be preserved for a long time." Connie remembered her grandmother had said the same thing to her. Because of that, she persisted in writing in her diary for 3 days, and it ended in laziness. Her grandmother's habit of writing in her diary was longer than Connie thought. It started from around the age of 6. At the beginning, she wrote down some of her experiences and records in the tribe. As the young mistress of a big family in the Fork tribe, she had lived a carefree life since she was young. However, the repetitive rhythm of life and the unchanging tribe, no matter how grand the ceremony was, after repeated many times in the diary, it began to become boring. All of this changed when she was 13 years old. That year, her grandmother, who was tired of staying in the tribe, chose to leave home one night and leave the tribe. The air in the vast twilight forest seemed to be sweeter than the air in the canyon. Then, she got lost. She, who had never left the tribe, got lost in the twilight forest. In that chaotic era, a young, beautiful, and defenseless girl was the most tempting food no matter where it was. He came when she was in despair. That was the first time she saw him. He dealt with those scary fellows who surrounded her so easily. But before she could thank him, he had already left. His hair was still very long that year. He had a skinny figure, slightly curly brown hair, and a melancholy gaze that made one's heart ache, but was as mesmerizing as the starry sky. After that, she followed him for many years. She embarked on a journey to find him. But even though he was clearly nearby, she could not see him at all. But every time she got lost and was about to cry, he would appear unintentionally, and then lead her out with a look of disdain. He would send her to a place where there were people, and then disappear again. Connie seemed to be able to see the young girl who was overjoyed to meet again, and the young girl who was unhappy to part again from those playful and cheerful words. After that, he became stronger day by day, and his hair gradually became thinner. He had a nickname, Hairless Monk. Master. Connie was so shocked that she almost threw the diary in her hand away. Diary reading website. Chapter 1547. The diary was very long. It recorded the gradual growth of her grandmother from an ignorant young girl. That inexplicable feeling made Connie's heart flutter. The various ties and separations between her grandmother and her master were not like a pair of lovers, but more like a competition between a wanderer and a follower. They had never expressed their feelings to each other, and even their conversations were extremely limited. This was because every conversation was recorded in detail in the diary, including his expression and tone when he spoke. It was as if the diary wanted to remember his voice and appearance. Her grandmother was lowly. But she did all this happily, as if she was chasing after her faith. Connie had heard her grandmother tell her stories about the hairless monk when she was young, and more than once. But she did not know that in those stories her grandmother told her, even if she did not personally experience them, she was a close observer. And the increasingly powerful master in her grandmother's diary used to be so domineering and unparalleled. But he was also as gentle as water. Connie only came back to her senses after reading more than half of the first diary. Judging from the time, she should probably flip through the diary in reverse to find the diary related to her brother faster. But when Connie closed the diary, she accidentally flipped to a page of the diary that was full of scribbles and scribbles. Her grandmother's handwriting was very elegant, and there were very few scribbles and amendments in the diary. But this diary page was extremely messy, and there were even a few scribbles. The tip of the pen almost pierced through the paper, as if it was a bloody letter written on a piece of cloth. What's going on? Connie looked at the scribbles, and could almost feel her grandmother's fear. She looked at it uneasily. Crazy. Crazy. They've all gone crazy. They're dancing a terrifying dance around the altar, and they're shouting strange noises. Many people who had died miserably were hung upside down on the gallows. Everyone, including the children, had a strange and excited smile on their faces. Their red eyes looked as if they were possessed by demons, and they were dancing and shouting tirelessly. A terrifying shadow shrouded the entire Urba tribe. I seem to have seen an indescribable thing in that shadow. It has the head of an octopus, and a mess of scribbles, and ink covered almost all the words. That must be a demon. They worshipped an evil god, and sold their souls to the demon, and then fell into madness. They discovered us, and started charging towards us. They wanted to eat us. Through their eyes, I could confirm that they saw us as food. Rex stood in front of me, and made them retreat. But they were indifferent, like starving wolves. They continued to charge towards us. I saw the terrifying existence in the shadow, and it seemed to be staring at us. They began to kill each other in their madness, and Rex took me to higher ground. We heard terrifying noises coming from the valley. I could feel his fear. We leaned against each other, but we felt fear and coldness from each other. We returned to the valley again, and saw a horrifying scene. Almost everyone in the tribe was dead, and they died horrible deaths. Most of them must have died from biting each other. There was not a complete corpse. But there were some who did not die. They smelled our scent, and attacked us again. This time, Rex did not run away. He killed the orcs who had fallen into madness. Then, he lit a fire and brought me away from there. The demon in the shadow killed everyone in the Urba tribe. This was a terrifying deal, a terrifying sacrifice. The diary stopped abruptly. Connie slowly placed the diary on his knees. He felt that his back and forehead were drenched in cold sweat. His heart was filled with fear, and the horrifying scene kept appearing in his mind. The Urba tribe was not massacred by Master, but by a strange and terrifying sacrifice. It was just that the only two people who had personally witnessed this incident did not tell the truth to the public. Perhaps the existence they saw in the shadow was too horrifying, so they did not dare to mention it to the outside world. They even did not hesitate to bear the infamy of being a homicidal maniac. What exactly is the demon in the shadow? Connie frowned as he thought. He hesitated for a while, and continued to flip through the diary. The diary was not updated for many days after that. Occasionally, there were one or two entries, but they were all written like, "Today, I dreamed of that terrifying place again." The diary did not record what the dream was, but his grandmother was troubled by this terrifying dream for a whole year. Then, she started writing a new diary. The hairless monk was notorious for massacring the Urba tribe. Even during the chaotic tribal war era, he became the Orc tribe's public enemy. Because of this, his grandmother was grounded by his great-grandfather, and was not allowed to leave the tribe. This 3-year pursuit seemed to have come to an end. Just like that day when he sent her to the cliff outside the tribe, he said as he looked at the sunset, "Perhaps, we will not meet again." From then on, his grandmother never saw him again. Of course, very few people in this world saw him again. 3 years later, she married the youngest and bravest warrior in the tribe. That warrior later became the chief of the tribe, who was her grandfather. Her married life was peaceful and elegant. There was no craziness or danger, and she never left the tribe again. The diary flowed like water, with a tinge of bliss in its calmness. However, compared to before, it seemed to have lost some flavor. The major events of the Fork tribe and the names that Connie was familiar with appeared in the diary. However, she was like a passerby. She recorded everything calmly, and did not feel anything. Rex's name and that terrifying night did not appear in the diary again. Connie put down the first diary, picked up the third diary, and flipped to the middle and back. She saw that her grandmother seemed to be rather happy when she was born. However, this was what was written in the diary. "You are a dark and ugly little fellow. But what can I do? You are my granddaughter, after all. I hope you can become prettier when you grow up. Little Connie, this name was given to you by your grandmother. Grow up quickly. You must see the outside world in the future. Connie looked at that dark and ugly description, and was silent for a long time before she flipped to the next page. In the following diary, she became the character that appeared the most frequently. The first time she learned to speak, the first time she walked, the first time she grew her teeth. Everything could be found in her grandmother's diary. Tears fell from the corner of Connie's eyes, and landed on the beautiful handwriting on the parchment. She flipped to the back, and suddenly, the style of the page changed again, and the messy handwriting appeared again. Ferdinand killed that dog and hung him on the gallows. The existence in the shadows appeared again. Chapter 1548. As expected, Meg and the others only found a warehouse full of gold, silver, and jewels. They didn't discover the existence of the secret dungeon. Wow, there are so many jewels and gold here. Amy's eyes lit up as she pounced on a pile of shiny gold. She turned to look at Meg and asked, "Father, are we going to take all of this?" Meg looked around the treasure vault, which was several hundred square meters in size. The gold, silver, and jewels casually piled up into a small mountain showed the wealth of the second largest tribe in the orc race over thousands of years. Speaking of which, this money belongs to Connie's family. It might be too much to take all of it. Mag frowned. He was a little conflicted. After pondering for a while, he said, "Carry as much as you can. These things belong to the bad guys now, so don't feel guilty. If the operation fails, you can still give them to Connie as military expenses when you go back. Oh, and remember to take the valuable ones. Amy, don't take the copper coins. That's the least valuable." Everyone looked at Meg, and after confirming that he was serious, they all took out their own space equipment and began to loot the treasure vault. After all, this was the wealth of a large tribe over thousands of years. The space equipment that everyone had was very limited, so even after everyone was done, the treasure vault didn't seem to have decreased by much. "So, boss, are we here to take the money?" Yarbemia asked with a strange expression. "How could that be? I just think that the treasure vault is a well-guarded and very safe place. It's also a good place to imprison criminals." Meg coughed dryly. "Of course, we're here at our own expense, so it's only right that we take some reward. Attention, the last 10th tier powerhouse in the palace has left and is heading south of the city." Camilla's voice suddenly sounded from the bat on Meg's shoulder. Everyone's eyes lit up. This meant that there were no longer any 10th tier powerhouses in the palace. They could begin to take over the palace. "Let's go. We can move freely now." Meg put a gemstone that looked to be of excellent quality into his pocket and walked towards the entrance of the treasury. "Father, wait for me," Amy called out as she skipped to catch up with him. With a series of clinking sounds, shiny copper coins fell to the ground. "Little Amy, copper coins are the most worthless thing in the world," Meg said helplessly as she looked at Amy. "But, it can be exchanged for a biscuit," Amy said with a smile as she pinched a copper coin between her fingers. "It's also very precious." Meg looked at Amy. Suddenly, he felt as if he was seeing the little girl who had happily skipped to buy pancakes with 2 copper coins when he had just arrived in this world. At that time, a copper coin was indeed very precious. "Let's go. Father will carry it for you." Meg took a handful of copper coins from Amy's pocket and put them into his own pocket. The little guy dropped a copper coin every 2 steps. His movements were a little too loud. 0202. "Answer if you hear me. Answer if you hear me," Meg said into the walkie-talkie. The channel was silent. After a while, there was still no reply from Connie. Meg frowned slightly and said again, 0202. "Answer if you hear me. Answer if you hear me." The channel was still silent. "Why isn't Big Sister Connie replying?" Amy whispered. Yarbemia said worriedly, "Could something have happened? But we didn't hear her call for help just now." The unplanned silence made everyone feel uneasy. "Connie, if you've been kidnapped, blink, squeak." Meg raised his voice slightly. There were no more 10th tier powerhouses in the palace now. It was the best time for them to conduct a comprehensive search. But at this time, Connie suddenly went missing, causing the original plan to come to a halt. Connie, the palace has entered a state of no top-level combatants guarding it. Tell me your location now. After we meet up, we will conduct a comprehensive search. Meg repeated. Connie still didn't reply. What's going on? Meg frowned. He was also confused by the current situation. Although Connie wasn't very reliable most of the time, she was still the hairless monk's disciple. She shouldn't have died so silently. Moreover, today's operation concerned her brother's life and death. How could she, who was the most proactive, suddenly go missing? After all, Connie was the one who knew this palace the best among them. According to the plan, once there were no more 10th-tier powerhouses in the palace, they would use this period of time to conduct a comprehensive search. What do we do now? Do we look for Connie or Ferdinand? Elizabeth asked Meg. Meg didn't think much, and said, let's find Connie first. Our time is limited, so let's split up. Once we encounter danger, return to the palace maid's dormitory immediately and leave. Don't fight. Okay. Elizabeth nodded. She left the treasury with Barbara and Yarbemia, and chose the left path. Meanwhile, Mag brought Gina and Amy out of the door, and walked into the passageway on the right. Scanning of the treasury complete. There are 561 cubic meters of various treasures. Do you want to collect all of them? The door to the treasury closed slowly behind them. At the same time, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Collecting all of them. Isn't that a little too much? Why don't I take a fraction? Meg muttered. For example, 500 cubic meters. The system was silent for a while. Then, it said, Host, your shamelessness is indeed beyond my expectations. Although I'm not middle-aged yet, I can already feel the middle-aged crisis. There aren't many opportunities like this to save some private money, Meg said calmly. TSK, the system snorted in disdain. However, an announcement quickly sounded. 500 cubic meters of treasures have been collected. Deducting 500 copper coins as packing fee, 500 copper coins as management fee per day, the haggling genius Meg struck again, and reduced the premium storage fee to the storage fee. 500 cubic meters of treasures. How wonderful. Meg didn't even dare to imagine how huge a sum that was. Warning. Black fog is detected within a 5-kilometer radius. Emergency mission. Host, please find the source of the black fog within 24 hours, eliminate it, and eliminate the black fog. Mission success reward, receive a face-changing mask. You can change your appearance in an extremely short period of time. Mission failure punishment, reveal your true identity to the world. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Black fog. Meg stopped in his tracks with a surprised expression. The black fog existed in the Fork tribe too? Could someone here have made a deal with the devil? Chapter 1549. The system's mission came too suddenly, and Meg was caught off guard. After returning from the Demon Islands, Meg had been studying information related to the Black Fog and the Great Old Ones. Now, he could only deduce that there might have been a group of powerful and mysterious existences in this world in ancient times. Until now, they might still exist in some way. And the Black Fog should be the manifestation of some of the mysterious existences in this world. They bewitched people with weak minds and made them willingly become their servants. And during this period, the Black Fog seemed to be appearing more frequently. This was not a good sign. Meg could not be sure if those mysterious existences had the ability to break the seal, or if they had already woken up from their deep slumber and were trying to control this world again. The appearance of humans, or the even older giant dragons, was still very young compared to the long years. If the Great Old Ones really existed and tried to control this world again, it could be a terrifying disaster for all the existences in this world. Could it be Gary? Meg thought with a frown. Gary was Connie's uncle, which meant that he was his father's half-brother. And it was this fellow who was deeply trusted by Connie's father and entrusted with important tasks that actually planned a terrifying rebellion. He led his troops into the palace and killed the chief and most of his relatives. The desire for power was indeed enough to drive people crazy. As an illegitimate son who had been treated differently since he was young, it was not unbelievable that Gary wanted to kill the chief and ascend to the throne. However, there had to be some kind of opportunity for him to do such a crazy thing. What Meg needed to confirm was if this opportunity had anything to do with the black fog. If he was sure, he would have to kill Gary and then destroy the black fog. "Father, what's wrong with you?" Amy asked as she looked at Meg, who had stopped in his tracks. "Nothing. Let's go." Meg continued to walk forward. It was very easy to confirm if Gary was the creator of the black fog. Meg, who had come into contact with the black fog twice, only needed to see him once to determine if the black fog existed on him. "But, where are we going to find Connie?" Gina asked worriedly. She was not used to the complicated palace. Their palace was much simpler than this one. "We can only try our luck," Meg said a little helplessly. Because there was no internet, he could not use the walkie-talkie to locate the location. Furthermore, Connie had disappeared without any warning, and there had been no sound from the walkie-talkie. There were only 3 possibilities. 1. Connie had dropped the walkie-talkie. 2. Connie had turned it off and lost contact. 3. The walkie-talkie had malfunctioned. This system guarantees with the system's personality that the quality of the system's products is guaranteed. The system's solemn voice sounded. Did he drop the walkie-talkie, or did something happen to Connie? Meg frowned as he pondered. He could only continue walking forward with Gina and Amy. They began to search for Connie's possible location and suspicious locations. Apart from looking for Connie and Ferdinand, Meg now had an additional mission to look for the black fog. When the black fog developed to a certain extent, it would have obvious characteristics and aura. For example, the small island in the boundless sea realm that was shrouded in black fog. Those who had been corroded by the black fog would also have obvious changes in their bodies. For example, Borge and Alfred, who had died in his hands. However, the black fog in the Fork tribe should not have developed to such an extent. Otherwise, he and Irina would have been able to sense the existence of the evil aura. He had to find the source of the black fog within 24 hours, and get rid of it. This was probably not an easy task. What a boring game. Irina appeared on top of a high wall. She shook her head disinterestedly as she looked at Basil, who was looking around vigilantly and did not dare to move recklessly. She looked toward the south of the city with a thoughtful expression. If she joined forces with the hairless monk, there was an 80% chance that they could get rid of those 3 10th-tier orcs first. Then, they could easily get rid of the 10th-tier orc below, and get rid of all the Fork tribe's high-end combat power easily. However, before they set off, Meg had a deep discussion with her about the orc situation. The August tribe had 6 10th-tier orcs, and a huge orc army. They were very powerful. Currently, only the Fork tribe could slightly keep the August tribe in check among the orcs. They relied on their high-end combat power, which was not too far behind in terms of numbers. If the Fork tribe lost all their 10th-tier powerhouses overnight, it would mean that they would drop out of the top 10 directly from second place, and become an ordinary orc tribe. This was not in line with their plan to balance the orcs' internal war and peace. It might even make the August tribe the most powerful tribe, and completely dominate the orcs. How troublesome. At most, I'll just go to the August tribe and kill a few bad fellows. Irina's beautiful brows furrowed, and she kicked a huge rock toward Basil. Hairless monk, I didn't expect you to still dare to appear in the Twilight Forest and kill so many of my people. Gary, who was wearing gold and silver armor, walked out of the dark night on a purple-gold lion, and looked at Rex coldly. Behind him, 2 teams of heavy cavalrymen in black armor were marching in an orderly manner. They were holding the same long spears, and looked like they were fully prepared. Rex looked at Gary with narrowed eyes, but his tone was still calm as he said, "You are that Kingslayer. I'm just taking back what belongs to me." "The chief's position should belong to me," Gary said loudly. He pointed his nearly 2-meter-long golden saber at Rex. "You scum who slaughtered your own father's tribe. Are you here to teach me a lesson now? I have nothing to do with you killing the king, but you shouldn't have forced her to her death. She was a kind lady." Rex looked at Gary calmly, and slowly clenched his fists. "I've killed so many people. I don't know which one you're talking about." Gary pursed his lips in disdain, and smiled. However, that's not important. I will kill you as well tonight. Then, you can sleep with that kind lady of yours. Daryl and Kurt also laughed in agreement. Gary was here, and it was 3 against 1. Even if the other party was the hairless monk, they were confident they could make him stay. You should repent. Rex disappeared on the spot, and a terrifying deep pit appeared on the ground. The sound of space being torn apart could be heard in the air, and in the next instant, he had already appeared in front of Gary, and smashed his huge fist toward his head. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1550. It only took a second for Gary's expression to change from smugness to fear. However, his 10th tier ability gave him a strong reaction, so he raised the long saber in front of him before the fist that was as big as a casserole landed on his face. He activated all the one-time defensive barriers on his body almost at the same time. The 3 layers of magic barriers burst like bubbles under that fist, and finally smashed onto the long saber in front of him. This long saber that was forged by a famous blacksmith in Isen Castle started to bend at a speed visible to the naked eye under that fist. That majestic golden lion whimpered, and immediately knelt on the ground with its legs bent as though it was submitting to Rex. Chief. Daryl and Kurt were shocked at the same time. The former began to chant spells and cast spells in a fluster, while the latter quickly dashed towards Rex with his sword, and stabbed it towards Rex's back. Rex's sudden burst of power was completely out of their expectations, and the terrifying speed and power that he unleashed caught them off guard. Just as that long saber was about to break, the last layer of magic barrier finally had some effect, and dissipated the last bit of power from that terrifying fist. Daryl's magic had already been channeled. 3 ice walls rose around Lex's body at the same time, trapping her like a prison. 3 thick icicles fell from the sky like divine punishment, smashing towards Lex directly below. Kurt's long sword also pierced towards Rex through the gap that Daryl had left for him. The sword was already engulfed by the crazily sharp sword aura, and the space seemed to be torn apart as it emitted an unpleasant creaking sound. After Gary took a few steps back, he steadied himself with his right leg, and raised the long saber above his head with trembling hands due to the numbness. He leaped high, and slashed at Rex, who was behind the ice wall. After a short moment of chaos, the 3 10th tier powerhouses formed an effective joint attack. Their eyes were glowing. No matter how powerful Rex was, he could only die in the face of a joint attack from 3 people of the same level. That was the confidence they had as top powerhouses. If they didn't reach the strongest in a certain field, they wouldn't be able to break through the 10th tier shackles. Trapped on 3 sides and with no way out, Lex seemed to have fallen into an extremely difficult situation. The knights in black armor watched this scene from afar with anticipation and excitement in their eyes. If the hairless monk, a powerhouse of a generation, died in the hands of the chief and the 2 lords, the Fork tribe's name would definitely spread far and wide. The calmest person on the scene was actually Lex, who was in danger. He glanced at the shining ice wall in front of him. His head of black hair made him look much younger. Compared to when he was bald, he looked less vicious and more mature. However, many people seemed to have forgotten that although he had grown hair, he was still the hairless monk. So, he lowered his head and crashed into the ice wall in front of him. Bang! The thick ice wall instantly shattered into ice shards, and Rex crashed into Gary again like a human-shaped armor-piercing bullet. The long blade's blade aura was like a rainbow as it slashed towards Lex's head. Lex, however, did not dodge. Instead, she welcomed the sharp blade and the frightening blade aura head-on. "You're courting death." A cruel smile appeared on Gary's face. Since Lex was rushing towards the blade, then there was no need for him to go easy on him. Clink. However, when the blade landed on Lex's head, it was as though it had landed on an indestructible rock. A few strands of black hair drifted down slowly, and fine cracks began to appear on the blade. Then, like a cracked eggshell, the cracks spread rapidly, and shattered into pieces of metal shards. Gary's eyes widened as he pressed on the long blade in his hand that was only left with half of the handle in disbelief. What just happened? This fellow used his head to smash his blade into pieces. He suddenly recalled a rumor that he heard when he was young. The hairless monk's strongest part was actually his head. He became bald because he wanted to become stronger. However, he had never thought that this rumor was actually true. There was actually a head that was more indestructible than his head. Lex took a step forward and broke through the ice wall to avoid the sword that was chasing after him. He also dodged the giant icicle that fell from the sky. Strength is not determined by the length of your hair. Lex reached out and brushed away the metal shards that were stuck to his hair. He smiled mockingly at the dumbfounded Gary. In the next instant, he appeared in front of him, grabbed his neck, and slammed him into the ground. Bam! With a dull thud, a huge sunken hole appeared in the ground. Lex raised his hand and punched Gary's face. Gary's head immediately sunk into the ground. The punches landed one after another, and Gary's head sunk deeper and deeper. Only his hands and legs that were exposed outside were trembling slightly. Let go of the chief, Kurt shouted with a trembling voice. He looked at Gary, who was being pressed down and beaten up, but he was a little hesitant. Meanwhile, that team of heavy-armored knights was also ready to attack. They looked at the chief who was being punched into the ground, and did not know how to stop that terrifying man at that moment. About 3 minutes later, Lex stood up slowly. He looked at Gary, whose body was almost half buried in the ground, and shook his head. "I don't want your worthless life. If she can't kill you with her own hands, she will definitely regret it." He glanced in the direction of the palace, and then turned to look at Daryl and Kurt, as well as those heavy-armored knights who were holding long spears. He calmly asked, "Who else?" The heavy-armored knights actually took a few steps back instinctively. Daryl and Kurt also averted their gazes, feeling aggrieved. If they fought with their lives on the line, they might have a chance to make Lex stay. However, they would definitely have to pay a huge price, and it might even cost their lives. After the other party expressed that he would not kill Gary, Daryl and Kurt chose to tactfully give up on the idea of fighting with their lives on the line. Sometimes, cowardice was also a helpless choice. Lex turned and left slowly. The lonely back view on the long street exuded an invincible sense of loneliness. "Chief." Daryl and Kurt quickly rushed forward and carefully dug out Gary, who had been beaten beyond recognition, from the hole. The medics quickly followed and began to treat Gary. Seal the news." Gary only managed to say a few words before he fainted completely. "Quick, bring the chief back to the palace," Daryl quickly said. Everyone hurriedly brought Gary back to the palace. "All units, take note. The 3 10th-tier powerhouses in the south of the city have already started to return to the palace." Camilla's voice rang in Meg's ears again. She said with some surprise, "But one of them is seriously injured and unconscious." Chapter 1551. A crushing defeat of 3 against 1? Meg raised his eyebrows as he listened to Camilla's report. This result was indeed a little out of his expectations. The hairless monk was actually so terrifying. However, the unexpected outcome of this battle had indeed bought them precious time. However, they still couldn't find Connie and Ferdinand after searching all the places in the palace where people could be hiding. They also couldn't find any clues related to the black fog. About 5 minutes later, Camilla warned that the 10th-tier powerhouses had already returned to the palace and asked them to be careful. "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" Right at this moment, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly rang in the palace, and many orc guards rushed in immediately. "The prison has been ransacked, and all the guards have been killed. The treasure vault has been ransacked. More than half of the treasure has been taken away." The shocking news quickly spread throughout the palace and caused a commotion. No one would have thought that someone would actually dare to attack the Fork tribe on the eve of the chief's conferring ceremony, and even sneak into the palace to wreak havoc and plunder. Bastard! They are simply looking down on the Fork tribe. Lock down the palace. I must catch all of these fellows. Kurt led his troops out furiously after hearing the report, and began to search the palace with his men. "Attention all units, attention all units. Retreat to the palace maid's dormitory immediately according to the plan." Solve all the problems along the way as quickly as possible. Meg grabbed Amy's hand with a dark expression and pushed the door open slightly. They could see the orc guards walking back and forth in the corridor, scurrying around like headless flies. Father, there are so many people outside. How are we going to leave? Amy looked at Meg worriedly. If there's no other way, we can only fight our way out. Meg frowned. They had to return to the palace maid's dormitory immediately. Once they were discovered, it would be difficult for them to retreat. I can make use of the bubble to hide our tracks, Gina said weakly at this moment. Meg and Amy looked at Gina at the same time. Gina's cheeks puffed up slightly, and she blew hard. A colorful bubble expanded rapidly until it covered all three of them. Is that all? Meg was a little puzzled as he poked the bubble that wrapped around him. It felt somewhat similar to a balloon. It should work. Gina nodded. Then let's set off. If anything unexpected happens, follow me closely. We need to return as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, Meg opened the door while no one was passing by and walked out with Amy and Gina. The three of them had just stepped out of the door when two orcs walked towards them. Mag had already pressed down on the cleaver, but the two orcs merely glanced at the door that was slowly closing with confusion. They pushed open the door to take a look, and walked right past the three of them. They didn't even look at them during the entire process. It really has an invisibility function. Meg couldn't help but feel surprised. Gina's tiny bubble had the effect of invisibility. Let's go. Meg was also happy to get close to them. He led Amy and Gina in the direction of the palace maid's dormitory. Intruder found in the cellar. Gather quickly. Just then, an orc ran past Meg and Gina in a hurry and shouted loudly. The orcs that were running around in the passageway all ran in the same direction when they heard that. Looks like Elizabeth and the rest have been discovered. Meg frowned. Many orcs were gathering, and there was no lack of level 7 and level 8 among them. They were quite a threat to Elizabeth and the rest. Of course, the more terrifying enemies were the two level 10 orcs that had returned to the palace. Can I kill them? Elizabeth's cold voice sounded in the earpiece. There's no need to be merciful to enemies who want to kill you, Meg replied softly. Boom. A loud sound came from somewhere in the west. The entire palace seemed to shake, and the orcs that were charging forward also slowed down significantly. Meg led Amy and Gina through the crowd. He lifted his leg and kicked anyone who blocked their way. Due to the invisibility effect, they managed to return to the palace maid's dormitory safely even though they caused some commotion. There were already 4 orcs outside the girls' dormitory trying to knock on the door and enter. Meg followed them into the dormitory. Before they could make a sound after discovering the teleportation portal, he knocked them down with a brick behind him. We've arrived at the teleportation point. How's the situation on your side? Meg asked as he dragged the 4 orcs into the dormitory and closed the door slowly. We've been stopped. There are so many of them. They've completely blocked off the passageway. Yarbemia's nervous voice sounded. They could vaguely hear the sounds of fighting. The enemy's level 10 powerhouse will arrive in 30 seconds. Camilla's voice sounded. Gina, stay here with Amy and guard the door. Don't let anyone in. I'll go and receive them, Meg ordered Gina. Father, let me go with you. I can protect you. Amy looked at Meg worriedly. Meg looked at Amy with a serious expression. Amy, this is the only way we can leave. If the teleportation portal is destroyed, none of us will be able to leave. Are you confident that you can protect this place with Sister Gina? Yes, I will protect this place with Sister Gina. Amy nodded seriously. Very good. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile. He turned to Gina and said, Gina, how long can this bubble last? It can last for 3 minutes, Gina replied after blowing another bubble for Meg. That's enough. Meg nodded. He listened to the commotion outside, opened the door halfway, and dashed out of the dormitory. He followed the crowd and walked quickly to where Elizabeth and the rest were trapped. Do you need backup? Irina's voice sounded. Not at the moment. Meg replied using his private line as he drew out his Tian Du sword slowly. He thought for a while, and put the sword away. Then, He took out his fat head fish. Sounds of intense battle could be heard continuously. The guards and soldiers in the palace were all rushing in one direction. Meg weaved through the crowd and rushed toward the area where the battle was taking place. The battle in the corridor was abnormally intense. Dozens of orc guards had already been frozen into ice sculptures, and dozens of orcs were crashing uncontrollably between the ceiling and the floor. The other party only had 3 masked figures in black, and they could roughly tell that they were women from their figures. However, the other party's ruthlessness and strength were rather frightening. Even though they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, they couldn't do anything to them in a short period of time. Lord Kurt is here. At this moment, an agitated voice sounded. All the orcs opened up a path to welcome Kurt's arrival. Damned fellows. Does everyone really think that the Fork tribe is a pushover? Kurt glared fiercely at the 3 figures in black in the corridor, and rushed forward with his saber. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1552. Take MIA and leave from the back. I'll stop him. I'll stop him, Elizabeth said coldly to Barbara as she looked at Kurt with a serious expression. Although she wasn't confident that she could stop this fellow, she had to create an opportunity for them to leave now. You will die. Barbara glanced at Kurt and pursed her lips. I won't. Elizabeth's answer was firm and resolute. All right. Barbara pulled Yarbemia back. With a wave of her hand, those orcs behind them seemed to have been slapped away by an invisible hand, and made a path for them. Big sister, don't. MIA turned to look at Elizabeth with fear and trepidation in her eyes. She didn't dare to imagine what would happen if she left Elizabeth here. Those scary orcs would definitely tear her apart. No one can be spared. Everyone has to die. A cruel smile appeared on Kurt's face. He had suffered a huge blow at Rex's hands tonight. Such weak opponents were too rare. He had even thought of how he was going to torture them to death after he captured them. All the orcs had already made way. Lord Kurt was one of the most powerful people in the Fork tribe. With him around, all the intruders would have no chance of escaping. Ice Sealing Domain. Elizabeth used her most powerful technique with a serious expression. Frost spread from all directions along the corridor, and everything in the corridor was sealed in ice. An ice element magic caster? Still a little lacking. Kurt swung his saber forward, and the frost that was spreading towards him was sliced apart as if it was solid. It didn't have any effect at all. All the orcs' eyes lit up. The ice magic that troubled them was not even worth mentioning in front of Lord Kurt. A smug smile appeared on Kurt's face. He liked the feeling of being the center of attention. Torturing and killing an opponent was undoubtedly exciting. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes slightly. The power of a 10th tier was indeed beyond her expectations. That orc in front of her was much more powerful than Fox. The ice-sealing domain couldn't even slow him down. Many countermeasures flashed past her mind. She obviously had no chance of winning if she faced him head-on. If she had no choice, she could only reveal her identity as a frost dragon to make him wary and not kill her, and wait for Meg and the rest to come to her rescue. However, she didn't want to rely on the reputation of a frost dragon unless she had no choice. That wasn't in line with her character. Then let's fight to the death first. Elizabeth stared at Kurt as an icy blue spear slowly formed in her hand. The translucent spear with a chilling intent. Instead of retreating, she charged towards Kurt while stepping on the ice. Die. Kurt curled his lips mockingly when he saw Elizabeth's actions. How dare an 8th tier fella take the initiative to attack him? She really didn't know what was good for her. He brandished his long saber casually, and began to think about how to tease this woman who seemed to have a good figure. However, just as Kurt passed by a T-junction, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the passageway beside him. A flash of cold light suddenly appeared, and crashed into him violently. Who's there? Kurt was shocked. He instinctively swung his long saber to the side. Clink! The crisp sound of metal hitting stone sounded in the long corridor. Kurt's long saber actually broke into two during the collision. Everyone widened their eyes as they watched the half of the long saber fly high into the air, and nail itself to the ceiling. Kurt, on the other hand, was heavily slammed into the wall. There was a gash about 10 centimeters wide on his lower abdomen. Blood instantly dyed his clothes red. He looked at the empty corridor in front of him with a shocked expression. Lord Kurt! All the orcs swarmed forward to protect Kurt in the middle. They also looked around in horror. They only saw a flash of cold light, and didn't see who attacked Kurt. Elizabeth's face was also filled with shock. Although she didn't see clearly who attacked Kurt, she sensed that person's presence. He had incredible speed and an awe-inspiring explosive power. Elizabeth, retreat. Go straight through the third passageway at the back. At this moment, Meg's order sounded in her ears. That person is boss. Elizabeth raised her eyebrows slightly. However, there wasn't much time for her to think now. She stopped moving forward, and turned around to rush back. The icy blue long spear in her hand was thrown forward forcefully, and those orcs who tried to stop her were skewered like candid haws. Barbara, bring MIA into the passageway in front of you. Go straight through. I'll wait for you at the junction ahead. Meg's voice sounded again. Barbara was stunned for a moment, but she still followed his order and brought MIA into the passageway in front of them. Kurt's attack caused panic and chaos among the orcs, and no one cared about Elizabeth and the rest for a moment. Lord Kurt was a powerful 10th tier orc, but his longsword was broken and he was injured. The other party must be a terrifying opponent. The most terrifying thing was that the other party was actually able to conceal himself. They only saw a flash of cold light from beginning to end, and didn't even see who the other party was. Damned bastard. Find them for me. I want to kill them. Kurt leaned against the wall. Although he was still in a state of shock, he still gave the order loudly. When the orcs heard this, they could only brace themselves and follow the order to chase after Elizabeth and the rest, as well as that invisible killer. Meg stood at the junction, and took out a clean cloth to wipe the blood off the kitchen knife carefully. He put it away again, and then kicked the orc whose leg was still exposed back into the room. His strength at the peak of the 9th tier gave him a decent amount of explosive power. With Connie's concealment bubble, he found the other party's most relaxed moment and gave him a dangerous blow. However, the other party was a close combat type 10th tier orc after all. He had a good sense of danger and his instincts were not bad, so it was a pity that he only managed to break his sword and give him a superficial stab. If it had been the Tian-Du sword, that stab would have pierced through him. However, it would be very difficult for him to hide his tracks. Connie, that lass, is really a natural assassin assistant. Meg couldn't help but mutter. The concealment bubble was too useful, but it could only be maintained for 3 minutes. Soon, footsteps sounded from the 2 corridors at the same time. Elizabeth, Barbara, and Yarbemia appeared in his line of sight. Behind them, there were even more footsteps approaching. MIA was delighted to see Elizabeth, and then said anxiously, "Boss, there are so many people chasing after us. Run. Let's go. Xiao Mi and Gina are already waiting for us." Meg looked at the 3 of them and smiled. Elizabeth looked deeply at Meg. With a wave of her hand, a continuous ice wall appeared behind her, completely sealing off the corridor. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1553. Meg and the rest returned to the palace maid's dormitory safely. When they arrived, Amy and Gina were ganging up on a demon guard whose head was already swollen. There were demons both inside and outside the door that had been knocked out. Meg raised his eyebrows. This combat ability really did not embarrass him at all. "Let's go. We'll leave this place first," Meg said to everyone as he kicked the unconscious orc aside. "Where's big sister Connie? Are we not going to wait for her?" Amy looked around and asked Meg. "Yeah, won't it be very dangerous to leave Connie here alone?" MIA also looked at Meg worriedly. Everyone's gaze fell on Meg. "There are many orcs coming this way," Elizabeth said softly. She waved her hand to close the door and cast several layers of ice walls at the same time. "Connie's walkie-talkie is no longer working, and we can't find her. Now that we've been exposed, we have to leave this place immediately. Otherwise, we'll be in great danger." Meg looked at everyone, shook his head, and said, "Connie is good at hiding and hiding. Moreover, this is where she grew up. It shouldn't be difficult for her to avoid being searched. Even if she's caught, she won't be executed immediately with her status. The biggest possibility is that she'll be executed together with her brother at the conferring ceremony tomorrow. We'll still have a chance to save her." Bang! Bang! There was the sound of someone banging on the door outside. "Let's go. If we're left behind, our plan will fail completely." Meg led the way into the teleportation portal. Everyone hesitated for a moment, then followed his instructions and walked into the teleportation portal's range. "Barbara, activate the teleportation portal," Meg said. Barbara touched the bracelet on her wrist. A silver starlight lit up and landed on the teleportation portal beneath everyone's feet. A 5-colored light suddenly shone. 3 seconds later, the light faded, and everyone in the teleportation portal had disappeared. Boom! The door of the dormitory and the ice wall were smashed into pieces of wood and ice. The orcs rushed in, but they only saw the palace maids who were unconscious. There was no trace of the intruders. Daryl and Kurt, who had his hands on his hips, came through the door. "Those guys have set up a teleportation array here." Daryl stood in the middle of the dormitory. He squatted down and wiped some of the remaining white powder with his fingers, sniffed it, and stood up with a gloomy face. "Damn it. There's even an array master among them." Kurt punched the wall angrily. His excessive movement pulled on the wound on his waist, causing him to grimace in pain. "First, it's the hairless monk. Then, there's a mysterious powerhouse in the west of the city. There's even a group of fellows who sneaked into the palace. There might even be a 10th-tier powerhouse among them. It seems like many people are targeting the Fork tribe," Daryl said with a frown. "Sir, the chief is awake." At this moment, an orc ran over quickly and reported, "Let's go. Let the chief decide this matter." Daryl's eyes lit up, and he immediately walked out. Now that the chief is awake, things will be easier. Kurt hurriedly followed. "Why isn't that little fellow out yet? Did she run into any trouble?" Rex stood on the roof of a stone hall and looked at the palace not far away worriedly. After hesitating for a while, he still stopped in his tracks and softly said, "If my disciple can't even come out of a place like this, she really won't be presentable. Attention all units, attention all units. Other than Connie, who has lost contact, everyone has successfully evacuated. Tonight's operation has ended. Return to the small courtyard according to the original plan," Meg said through the walkie-talkie. He stood on the cliff and looked in the direction of the palace, and couldn't help but feel a little worried. He didn't know where that lass Connie was now, and if she was in danger. Elizabeth and the rest were also silent. It was a little uncomfortable to leave a comrade behind. "Let's go back first." Meg held Amy's hand and walked down the cliff. Elizabeth looked at Meg's back view with confusion and doubt in her eyes. Was he the mysterious person who suddenly rushed out from the passageway and stabbed that orc? With that speed and explosive power, he should be infinitely close to level 10, right? Everyone returned to the small courtyard easily under the cover of the night and chaos. Irina also returned to the small courtyard, and said to everyone who had a slightly solemn expression, "I went to the palace before I came back, but I didn't find Connie. Her aura doesn't seem to be in the palace anymore." Meg's eyes lit up when he heard that, and said, "Seems like she has already left the palace on her own." That's good news. Everyone's expressions relaxed when they heard that, and their hearts were mostly at ease. If Big Sister Connie has already left the palace, then why didn't she contact us? Why didn't she come back here? Amy asked, a little puzzled. Maybe she found something in the palace. Meg pondered and said, Connie's sudden loss of contact was indeed a little strange. Given her noisy personality, she should be the most active one in the walkie-talkie channel. She will definitely appear tomorrow. Ferdinand will be executed at the conferring ceremony. She's not someone who will give up easily. Meg smiled as he ended today's operation and conversation, and let everyone return to their rooms to rest. After everyone left, Irina didn't leave. She looked at Meg and asked, "Do we need to look for her again?" "No need. If she wants to hide, we won't be able to find her. Meg shook his head. Connie was someone who could even enter and leave the Bastille prison as she pleased, after all. She was naturally invincible when it came to playing hide-and-seek. However, someone in the Fork tribe seems to have made a deal with the evil god, so there might be a black fog. Did you find anything suspicious when you entered the palace earlier? Meg asked in a lowered voice. Is it here too? Irina raised her eyebrows slightly, and pondered for a while before saying, I felt a little uncomfortable when I entered the palace, but I didn't pay much attention to it then. Now that I think about it, it might be an instinctive reaction to the evil aura. However, this feeling was very faint, and didn't even make me think about it. Seems like the source does exist in the palace. Meg nodded thoughtfully. This way, the target would be narrowed down, and the possibility of Gary being involved would increase greatly. The Wind Forest, the Boundless Sea Realm, and now the Twilight Forest. What exactly are those evil gods trying to do? Could it be that they want to regain control of this world? Meg shook his head with a grave expression, and said, We can't be sure of their motive now, but the appearance of the black fog will definitely breed evil. If this situation spreads to the entire continent, civilization and order will be destroyed, and the world will be destroyed. The scene on that small island in the Boundless Sea Realm that was shrouded in black fog was still vivid in Meg's mind. If the black fog was allowed to develop, it would cause a destructive blow to this world, and no one would be able to escape. What a bunch of disgusting fellows. Irina frowned. After a moment of silence, she looked at Meg and said, If it's just the two of us, I'm afraid we won't be able to get rid of the black fog that might appear all over the world. This is something that all the races have to face. It's not enough to just rely on us. Meg nodded slightly. Therefore, I intend to inform the leaders of all the races about this when the races are having peace talks. I want them to know about the existence of the black fog and try their best to unite to deal with the evil. That's not realistic. How would we know if we don't try? Bookhouse reading website. However, this request might be somewhat excessive and bloody. Furthermore, this dish is the main course of today's banquet. Please feel free to ask. Don't look down on our big kitchen. We have everything you need. Even if you need special ingredients, as long as you ask, I'll be able to get them for you before tonight's banquet starts. Hyman said while patting her chest. I need the lungs of a couple whose love is stronger than gold, Meg said. Hyman was obviously stunned. After a while, she looked at Meg with some hesitation, and said, Are you talking about the lungs of a living couple? Orcs. Yes. I can only get the freshest lungs by dissecting them myself. Meg nodded seriously. You're planning to make husband and wife lung slice? Hyman suddenly thought of something, and couldn't help but raise her voice. I didn't expect you to know about it too. Meg was astonished. I've seen the report of your duel with Master Harris. You defeated Master Harris with a husband and wife lung slice in the end, and ended his undefeated record. Hyman nodded with excitement in her eyes. I was just lucky. Meg shook his head humbly. So the dish husband and wife lung slice is really made with the lungs of a couple? Hyman pondered as she looked at Meg. She wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. How would he dare to kill a couple to make a dish in a place like Chaos City where order prevailed? He would be labeled as a demon chef even if he could really make an extraordinary dish using such a cruel method, right? Meg seemed to have seen through Hyman's thoughts, and smilingly said, When I was in Chaos City, I used the lungs of a bull and a cow to make it. However, if I could use the lung slice of a real married couple, especially a loving couple, this dish would be considered perfect. However, it's naturally unreasonable to kill people for a dish. I heard that you're going to execute many criminals today. I wonder if there are any loving couples among them. Can you provide a pair? I see. Hyman understood. She pondered seriously for a while, and recalled that the two of them just happened to meet Meg's requirements. They should be executed at the conferring ceremony today. If she could get them to the main kitchen, she could provide a qualified ingredient for Mr. Meg. She looked at him and said, There is a pair, but I can't make the decision. I have to report it. Then I'll have to trouble you. If we can find a couple whose love is stronger than gold, I'm confident that the finale of tonight's husband and wife lung slice will amaze everyone. Meg's gaze had a hint of craziness, and his face was full of excitement. Geniuses are indeed all lunatics. Hymin mumbled in her heart. After confirming with Meg the 10 dishes that would be served at the main banquet table tonight, she left in a hurry. I hope this will bring that loving couple to shore first. Meg looked at Hyman's back view as she left. He shook his head with a smile, and closed the courtyard door. Boss, is Connie still not back? Didn't she contact you? Mia also got up and came to the courtyard. She looked at Meg worriedly. Yes, but if nothing goes wrong, she will definitely appear at tonight's conferring banquet. Meg nodded, but he wasn't too worried. Connie still had a powerful master protecting her, after all. She wouldn't get into trouble so easily. I'm going out for a while. I'll be back before evening. Irina walked out of the room and spoke to Meg. A faint golden light lit up under her feet, and she disappeared in the blink of an eye. If there's nothing else, I'm going back to sleep. Camilla walked around the courtyard, yawned, and went back to her room, closing the door on the way. I'm going to the kitchen to take a look and get some information. If you want to eat something, follow me. Meg pushed open the courtyard door and walked out. Father, wait for me. Amy ran over unsteadily with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and directly jumped into Meg's arms. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1555. Meg spent the entire morning to successfully infiltrate the inner circle of the chefs in the main kitchen, and obtained some information from them. Most of the information was already in the Grey Temple's intelligence. However, the main kitchen had always been providing food for the chief and the nobles in the inner city, so they knew the secret history of the palace like the back of their hands. Under Meg's guidance, they told many stories about the former chief. Gary and the former chief, Isaiah, were half-brothers. Gary was considered an illegitimate son, but he was accepted into the palace because he also had outstanding talent. Connie and Ferdinand might also be half-siblings. Connie was the queen's child, but there was a lot of controversy about whether Ferdinand was the queen's child. It was said that the queen had not been pregnant for many years after marrying the chief. However, the chief had intercourse with a palace maid after getting drunk one day, and they became pregnant. After the child was born, the queen killed the mother and took the child for herself. She announced to the public that the child was her son, which was young Master Ferdinand. 2 years later, Princess Connie was born. Of course, this was not confirmed, and it could be rumors in the palace. There were no related records in the Grey Temple's intelligence, either. Anyway, after listening to the history of love in the palace, it was just a melodramatic palace drama. These imperial chefs really dared to spread and say anything. However, Meg got confirmation from them that Connie and Ferdinand were indeed close. They grew up together, and Ferdinand took good care of Connie. As for Gary, these chefs were obviously wary of him, and basically avoided all questions about him. Even if they did talk about him, they would only praise him insincerely. When Meg was about to return to the courtyard, he bumped into Hannah at the corner. Meg raised his brow slightly, and hurriedly pulled Hannah into a corner to avoid 2 servants who were passing by. Hannah's face was pressed against Meg's chest, and she blushed instantly when she felt that scorching temperature and strong heartbeat. Meg only took a step back when he heard the footsteps getting further away. He looked at the blushing Hannah, and couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Why are you here?" I'm here to deliver wine to them," Hannah said innocently. "Oh, I see." Mag smiled awkwardly. He thought Hannah had snuck in to look for him. Hannah said in a low voice, "I've already drugged it. I told them in advance that the dosage this time is bigger, so even if the tester gets drunk, it won't attract any attention." "All right." Meg nodded. "Also, I treated an uncle to a drink on my way here. I heard from him that something terrible happened last night. A powerful enemy attacked the Fork tribe. Is it an organized operation?" Hannah's eyes were glowing. "No." "Oh. Hannah's mood clearly became a lot more downcast. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. He felt like laughing. This girl was truly a loyal comrade with high expectations for the organization. Hannah looked at Meg with a conflicted expression, and said, "Then, when are you going to bring that little girl away yesterday? Although she's quite obedient, and doesn't make a fuss, but she can really drink. She finished a huge vat of my wine last night, and is still drunk at home now. There's such a thing." Meg was also a little surprised to hear that. He knew that the rum at Connie's house was all very strong, and even adult orcs couldn't drink much of it. That little fellow actually drank a huge vat of it. Her alcohol tolerance was really shocking. Meg pondered, and said, "Take care of her for a day or two more. After this incident is over, I will arrange a place for her to go. Perhaps her parents are still around." "She said that she doesn't have parents anymore," Hannah said directly. "Then wait for my arrangements." "All right." Hannah nodded slightly. When she heard footsteps approaching again, she subconsciously snuggled into Meg's arms. "You have to lean against the wall." Meg pushed Hannah against the wall a little helplessly, and turned sideways to use the withered vines hanging on the wall to block his vision. "Let's go. Be careful, and don't expose your identity," Meg said after they had walked far away. "Okay." Hannah nodded, and walked out quickly with a blush on her face. Meg waited in the same spot for a while, and then walked in the direction of the small courtyard as well. As he walked on a small path, an orc that looked like a servant walked towards him with a bundle of firewood. Meg moved sideways to let him pass. However, perhaps because the firewood was too big, the orc accidentally bumped into Meg when he walked past him. That middle-aged orc quickly put down the firewood, and patted the wood shavings off Meg's sleeves with an apologetic look on his face. He also stuffed a bamboo tube into his hand. "It's okay, you can go." Meg understood tacitly, and put away the bamboo tube. He waved his hand in a friendly manner, and turned to leave. That orc also picked up his firewood and left. Meg returned to his room in the small courtyard, and opened the bamboo tube. It was the latest intelligence provided by the Grey Temple's informant, which included what happened at the Fork tribe last night. The hairless monk fought Gary, Darryl, and Kurt, injured Gary, and left swiftly. The mysterious powerhouse who stopped Basil from returning was also recorded in the tube. There was also a list of important guests who would be present today, including the chief of the August tribe, Auster. "That fellow Auster will come as expected." Meg frowned. As a war fanatic among the orcs, Auster was bent on starting a new full-scale war. Auster and the August tribe were also behind Gary's rebellion. He might be here to support Gary today. Once the Fork tribe and the August tribe formed a united front, the orcs would become a race that was committed to starting wars, and there would be no possibility of internal checks and balances. "Seems like I have to do something tonight." Meg lit up the bamboo tube and the secret letter, and threw them into the stove at the side to burn. He paced around the room, and asked in his heart, "System, are you selling the 3-second P2E, 10-minute recovery skill bag? Not for sale. I'm really paying. Cash, not elephant food. It's useless to give cash. Recovering to your peak for 10 minutes is a very important reward. If it appears frequently, or even if it can be sold, it will greatly reduce its value. Furthermore, before the host's physical attributes recover completely, it will cause a certain amount of damage to your body every time you use this ability. If it accumulates too much, it might cause you to never be able to recover to your peak state," the system said seriously. "Then, you better fucking locate the black fog for me. I know it's probably in the palace now, but how do I determine its location, and how do I get rid of it in the remaining few hours? This is the content of the mission. How can it still be called a mission if it's not difficult? System, what is my mission? To become a real god of cookery in this world. Then why the fuck do I have to save the world? I'm just a chef. A real god of cookery has to learn how to save the world apart from being able to make touching delicacies. Shut up. Scram. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1556. Why are they so afraid of Ugly Duckling? Perhaps they've mistaken Ugly Duckling for their totem. They do look quite similar. Amy and Barbara sat on the low wall in the courtyard, looking at two orcs who were kneeling on the ground and respectfully placing two freshly cooked grilled fish in front of Ugly Duckling before humbly pressing their foreheads against the ground. They were conversing with each other with peculiar expressions on their faces. Ugly Duckling looked at the grilled fish on the plate with glowing eyes, but it wasn't in a hurry to dig in. Instead, it reached out with its front paws and gently pressed them against the heads of the two orcs. The two orcs raised their heads and put their palms together before bowing to Ugly Duckling twice with excitement and devotion on their faces. Only then did they get up and leave happily. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling waited until the two orcs had completely disappeared into the distance before it happily lowered its head to eat the grilled fish. H, if this guy keeps eating here every day, it's going to become super fat in no time. Even if it grows wings, it won't be able to fly, Amy grumbled with disdain as she looked at Ugly Duckling's increasingly chubby back. Do ducks on the continent have to be able to fly when they grow up? Is there no upper limit to their weight? For example, 10 kilograms, 20 kilograms, and so on? Barbara was a little perplexed, even though she didn't know how the ducks on the moon grew up. Oh. Amy's eyes lit up with a thoughtful expression as she said, "That's a very good idea. In any case, if they grow too big, they won't be able to fit in the oven." Ugly Duckling, which was happily eating, suddenly stopped and slowly turned its head with a horrified expression. "Keep eating. You have to eat until you're full," Amy said with an innocent smile. Ugly Duckling opened its mouth, and half of the fish in its mouth fell to the ground. It looked down at the two grilled fish on the plate with a reluctant expression, and hesitated for a while before skipping toward Amy with its tail wagging. Its chubby body appeared to be quite nimble on the fine stone floor, and it made its way to the wall with the intention of jumping directly into Amy's arms. Pater, however, its leap was only half the height of the wall, and it slammed into Amy's feet, then slowly slid to the ground against the wall. "Ugly Duckling, don't you know how heavy you are?" Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a resigned smile. Ugly Duckling is so stupid. Barbara was already convulsing with laughter, and almost fell off the wall. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with an aggrieved expression, trying to regain some sense of existence and status by acting cute. "What are you laughing at?" Meg came out of the room when he heard the laughter. He walked over to the wall and gently hugged Amy to prevent her from falling. Amy pointed at Ugly Duckling and said, "Look, father. That idiot Ugly Duckling is getting fatter and fatter. It's been eating and drinking for free ever since it came here. Did those people send it food again?" Meg glanced at the ceramic plate on the ground, and was also a little surprised. Since last night, chefs had been sending delicious food to the small courtyard one after another. However, it wasn't for them, but for Ugly Duckling. The Grey Temple's intelligence had mentioned that the Fork tribe worshipped an existence called the Flurkin Beast God, which should be some kind of mysterious and powerful feline existence. Therefore, the Fork tribe was in awe of all felines. I heard them call Ugly Duckling Lord Flurkin Beast God. Is Ugly Duckling that breed of cat? Barbara asked. They called Ugly Duckling Lord Flurkin Beast God. Meg looked at Barbara with surprise. That name wasn't given casually. Yes, that's what the two chefs called it just now. Also, they left very happily after Ugly Duckling patted their heads. Amy nodded in support. Flurkin Beast. Orange cat. Could it be some kind of strange coincidence? Meg looked at Ugly Duckling with a frown. He thought for a while, and turned to walk toward the courtyard door. "I'm going out for a while. Be good at home. What is father going to do?" Amy looked at Meg's back view as he walked away. "Maybe he has something to do." Barbara shrugged. She wasn't very interested. Meg got a picture of the Flurkin Beast God through Heyman. It was something that every household in the Fork tribe had, and it wasn't a very rare object. Meg didn't arouse Heyman's suspicion when he asked to borrow it. He only reminded him in detail about the things to take note of when he passed the picture to him, and that he had to return it to him as soon as he was done looking at it. From these details, Meg could see how much importance Heyman attached to this picture, and how much respect he had for the Flurkin Beast God that they worshipped. Meg returned to the small courtyard and opened the picture in his room. In the middle of the square drawing made of animal skin, there was a giant orange cat with a round body drawn with orange paint. It was the kind of orange that could crush a brick bed. It had completely given up on maintaining its figure, and its stomach looked as though it had a ball in it. The most surprising thing was that there was a pair of white wings on the back of this orange cat. However, these wings were a little different from the long and slender wings of birds. They were more like two fat and round white clouds that were only the size of a palm. They were more like a pair of ornaments that were mounted on the back of the orange cat. They looked rather silly and adorable. If it wasn't for this huge orange cat's bright and piercing eyes that seemed to contain the sea of stars, Meg would have thought that it was someone's orange cat that had run out with a pair of small wings attached to it unwillingly. This is a fucking orange cat, right? Meg couldn't help but swear after staring at the picture for a long time. He finally understood why those chefs worshipped Ugly Duckling like a god. From the looks of it, apart from the pair of small wings on its back and the fact that it was slightly rounder, Ugly Duckling was taken from this picture. These wings. Meg murmured. There was also a pair of symmetrical small white wings on Ugly Duckling's back. Could it be some kind of coincidence? Although cats hadn't become a common pet for ordinary people yet, he had seen many cats after coming to this world. Black and white cats were the majority, and he had also seen grey cats and dragonly cats. However, there was only one orange cat in his house that could be seen everywhere. Furthermore, anyone who saw Ugly Duckling usually couldn't help but take a few more glances at it, as if there was a cat of this color in this world. No matter if it's a black cat or a white cat, an orange cat that can act mysterious is a good cat. Meg closed the picture, and a smile appeared on his face. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1557. The chief of the Blue Sky tribe has arrived. The envoy of the Teton tribe has arrived. The envoy of the Gara tribe has arrived. It was close to evening, and the guests from various tribes who came to attend the ceremony arrived one after another. Loud voices resonated throughout the city tower, and all kinds of flying steeds stopped in the empty space outside the city. The distinguished guests from various tribes were welcomed into the city. With the power of the tribe, the city walls that were destroyed last night were all repaired. Although some areas were not completely cleaned up, as long as the destruction was thorough enough, there would naturally be a reason to get away with it. Gary stood on the tallest tower in the palace, and nodded with satisfaction as he watched this scene. "Chief, we haven't found any traces of the hairless monk and that mysterious attacker yet. They took advantage of the chaos last night, but they didn't manage to save Ferdinand. Today, all the powerhouses of the orcs are gathered here, and Chief Auster of the August tribe is holding the fort. They probably won't dare to come again," Darryl said behind Gary. Darryl said in a low voice as he stood behind Gary. He was still traumatized by what happened last night. "If they dare to come again today, I will make sure they don't return," Gary said coldly. Darryl continued, "Chief, the count of the criminals who escaped last night has been tabulated. Over 800 of the criminals who were supposed to be executed today have escaped, accounting for 80% of them. The troops have already brought the hunting dogs to search for them, and we should be able to catch some of them. Should we execute them according to the original plan tonight? As long as Ferdinand doesn't escape, it doesn't matter how many of them escape." Gary smiled in disdain, and continued, "Hang? Why not? I want everyone to know the consequences of betraying me. When those fellows are caught, they will be hanged one by one. No one can escape." Darryl's expression was a little unnatural. His lips moved, but he still nodded in the end. "Yes." Gary turned around, and looked at Darryl. He said in a low voice, "Darryl, I know Isaiah treated you well back then, and helped you a lot in your cultivation." "Yes." Darryl looked down, and nodded silently. "Our Fork tribe has already lost 2 10th-tier powerhouses during this period, and we can barely maintain our position as the second orc tribe." Gary grinned, but his voice was extremely cold. "I don't want to lose any more 10th-tier powerhouses. What do you think?" Darryl shuddered, and quickly answered, "I don't think so. Very good. Gary reached out to pat Daryl's shoulder gently, and smilingly said, "Go on. There are still many things that need your attention." "Yes." Daryl hurriedly turned and walked out as if he had been granted amnesty. Gary looked at the bustling tribe, opened his arms, and looked up at the sky with a smile. "Isaiah, do you see that? The Fork tribe is going to belong to me completely soon. You shouldn't have taken my words as a joke back then when I said I would take back what was mine. This is the handover procedure. We will hand them over to you, but we need to confirm that they are indeed dead and bring their bodies back to report." A prisoner's carriage stopped at the back door of the kitchen. An orc with a scar on his face handed a piece of craft paper to Hyman. After confirming that he had signed it, the orc put it away and waved his hand behind him. Two orcs immediately dragged two prisoners in ragged clothes with black hoods over their heads to the door. "Thank you for your hard work, sirs. I will send their bodies out after the lungs are taken out," Hyman said with a chuckle as he waved his hand. Two chefs who were in charge of handling ferocious beasts went forward, and each of them carried the two prisoners into the kitchen. Hyman followed them in. "Boss, do you really think there are people who eat orc lungs? Aren't lungs the most disgusting thing to eat?" an orc asked softly. "What do you know? The chefs who can get the chief to order them personally can make delicious dishes even if it's shit." The scar-faced orc spat out a mouthful of saliva. He pursed his lips as he watched the two prisoners being carried away, and said, "It's better to go straight to the gallows than to have their lungs taken out alive." The two orcs who were being carried struggled with all their might, but their hands and bodies were tied up with ropes. Being carried by a pair of strong hands, they were like chickens waiting to be slaughtered. No matter how hard they struggled, it was futile and useless. Haman followed behind with a sigh, and said, "Guys, stop struggling. I will talk to Mr. Mag later and ask him to give you a quick death. No matter what, it would be more comfortable than going to the gallows." The lady on the left broke down and cried when she heard this. "Juliet, don't be afraid, I'm here. I'm still here," Romeo called out anxiously. The two people's hands danced in the air before finally touching each other and tightly grasping each other's hands. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Romeo comforted her. "I'm not afraid, I just don't want to have my stomach cut open." Juliet choked. Romeo held Juliet's hand tightly, but he didn't know how to answer for a long time. Hyman brought people to the first kitchen, knocked on the door, and looked at Meg, who opened the door. "Mr. Meg, I've brought the people to you. They were just taken out of the prison, and the smell on their bodies is a bit heavy. Do you need to deal with them first?" Meg glanced at the two prisoners with their heads covered, and recognized them immediately. However, he still asked confusedly, "Are you sure this is a loving couple? These two are Romeo and Juliet, the model couple of our Fork tribe. There's no other couple more loving than them in the entire tribe," Hyman said with a nod. Haman nodded. He looked at the two of them with pity in his eyes. He went closer to Mag, and whispered, "They are a good couple. If it's possible, let them suffer less later." "All right." Meg nodded. He opened the door, and said, "Just send them in. We will deal with them ourselves. I need to start preparing. If there's nothing else, please don't disturb us." "All right, I will warn them." Hyman hurriedly nodded. Right now, the most important department in the main kitchen was naturally the number 1 kitchen. There was no problem if the taste of the other seats was slightly inferior, but the main banquet seats were occupied by the nobles of the various tribes. If something went wrong, it would be a big problem. The tall orc placed Romeo and Juliet on the ground, and then turned to leave. Meg closed the door, and got Barbara to set up an array formation to prevent eavesdropping and intrusions. Everyone gathered around, and looked curiously at the two people who were hugging back to back on the ground. Mag had already informed everyone beforehand, and they all knew that someone would be sent over. Meg went forward, and removed the black hood on their heads. The sudden appearance of light made the two of them close their eyes instinctively. They only opened them after a while, and were stunned to see Meg and the other ladies surrounding them. Didn't he say he was going to capture them to extract their lungs to cook? Why was it a bunch of harmless and pretty ladies? Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1558. Hello, I am Meg, Meg said with a smile. Romeo and Juliet's gazes landed on Meg, who was wearing a chef's uniform and holding a thick cleaver. They were horrified. Is this fellow the head chef? Romeo tried his best to protect Juliet behind him as he loudly said to Meg, if you want to take her lungs, take mine. My lungs are big enough. Don't touch her. Juliet calmed down very quickly. She looked into Meg's eyes, and said, if you want to take them, then take them together. Didn't you say husband and wife lung slice? We are a couple. It was indeed my idea to make the husband and wife lung slice and bring the two of you here, but I'm not really going to take your lungs. Meg went forward and slashed the ropes around the two of them. He kept his cleaver, and took 2 steps back with a smile. Actually, we are good people. Romeo and Juliet were stunned when the ropes around them were suddenly released. They looked at Meg, who kept his cleaver behind him with a smile. He indeed didn't look like a brutal butcher, so they couldn't make up their minds all of a sudden. Then what do you want to do? Romeo asked Meg as he held the weak Juliet in his arms. After what happened during this period, he would no longer trust others easily. He was worried that this was another one of Gary's schemes. Meg smiled, and said, I am Meg, the owner and head chef of Mammoth in Chaos City. These are the service staff of the restaurant. We are Connie's friends. She was chased to Chaos City previously, and then became a member of our restaurant by chance. We were entrusted by her to come and save you. Connie is not dead. Romeo looked at Meg in surprise. Yes, she's not dead. Meg nodded. You said that you are friends with Connie. Do you have proof? If you're a chef from Chaos City, what makes you think you can save us? Juliet looked at Meg warily. His words were full of loopholes. If Gary wanted to humiliate them again before he died, she would rather die a quick and clean death. You'll know when you see this. Meg took out a shadow recording stone from his pocket. He swiped his finger across the surface of the stone, and a virtual image appeared in front of everyone. It was Connie. I am Connie, my brother, and my friends and family. If you see this bearded man holding the photo stone, please believe what he says. We are trying our best to rescue you, please listen to his orders. The image was not long, and after that, the image disappeared. It's Connie. Romeo looked at Juliet and confirmed. Meg smiled, and said, actually, you don't have to worry too much. I think you know very well whether Gary has the need to tease you at this point in time. If he still wanted to get any information from you, he wouldn't have waited until the day of the gallows. Juliet stood up with Romeo's help, and looked at Meg apologetically as she said, I'm sorry. Too many things have happened recently, so we can't trust strangers easily. You're welcome, madam. Meg nodded slightly. May I ask where Connie is now? Is her situation all right? Romeo asked anxiously. We have lost contact with Connie for now, but she will definitely appear at the conferring ceremony tonight. Meg shook his head. He still wanted to know where Connie had gone. That won't do. She's just a little girl. If she appears at the conferring ceremony, she will definitely be caught by Gary and hang together with Ferdinand. Romeo shook his head and stomped his feet anxiously. Juliet also looked at Meg and asked, how can we contact Connie? Today's conferring ceremony will definitely be very dangerous. We can't let her take the risk. The chief only left behind a son and a daughter, and we can't save Ferdinand. If Connie is caught too, then the Fork tribe will completely fall into Gary's hands. I can't contact Connie now, either. Her motive for coming back is to save Ferdinand. She won't give up just like that. Meg shook his head. He looked at the two people who were very concerned, and continued, if the two of you want to leave this place safely, please remember what I'm going to say next. Romeo and Juliet saw that Meg had no intention of continuing the discussion. They hesitated for a while, but still chose to nod. I used the excuse of retrieving the lungs to get them to bring the two of you here, and made the husband and wife lung slice the last dish to buy some time. There will definitely be chaos at tonight's conferring ceremony, and we will take the opportunity to bring the two of you away. However, in order to make the other party believe that I brought them here for the purpose of obtaining ingredients, The two of you will have to lie on that table cooperatively later. You can rest during the process, and I will tell you what to do when needed, Meg said with a serious expression. The two of them nodded. But Romeo still wanted to say something. The walls have ears. Please try to remain silent during this process. You don't have to worry about the conferring ceremony. Meg directly interrupted Romeo and turned to walk toward the stove. Perhaps they already have a plan. We should remain silent, Juliet said as she tugged at Romeo's sleeve gently. Millimeter. Romeo nodded upon hearing that. Although he had a million questions in his heart, he held them back and didn't continue asking. Brother, why did father send the two of us to attend this conferring ceremony? Didn't he look down on that treacherous Kingslayer Gary? Harbeng asked perplexedly as he followed behind Haga. Lower your voice, lest you cause trouble. Haga looked around and lowered his voice as he said, the August tribe likes to fight. Previously, the chief of the Fork tribe, Isaiah, maintained the balance. Now that Gary has taken over, father sent us to see which side he is on so that our tribe can prepare. Then, which side are we on? Harbeng asked as he scratched his head. In this 100 years of peace, our tribe has been recuperating, and our tribesmen have been living in peace. Peace is the best. Once a war breaks out, a small tribe like ours will be cannon fodder. Those big tribes won't care about us. Haga shook his head. That's true. War is not interesting at all. Harbeng nodded. He thought for a while, and smilingly said, I heard that a chef from Chaos City is in charge of this banquet. Do you think it's Mr. Mac? Little boss. Will you come? Haga revealed a simple and honest smile. I think so. Mr. Mac never leaves Little Boss behind when he goes out, Harbeng said with a smile. Seems like we are going to have a good meal tonight. Chapter 1559. The sun was setting in the west, and most of the guests from the various tribes had arrived. There were hundreds of seats in the empty space in front of the palace, and 10 white jade tables were placed closest to the palace. Only the most distinguished guests could sit there. The representatives from the various tribes had already taken their seats, but the main seat in the middle was still empty. Many orcs would look over there subconsciously. It was obvious who that seat belonged to. The August tribe's representative team had yet to arrive, and it was said that Auster would come personally, which attracted a lot of attention. Outside the square, there were many ordinary orcs from the Fork tribe who came to watch the ceremony. Witnessing the conferring ceremony of the new chief was undoubtedly a very important thing. It meant that the Fork tribe had entered a new era. The orcs were still reminiscing about Chief Isaiah's kindness, but they had no choice but to accept the result of Gary, who was even more ruthless and cruel, taking over. There was a gallows at the side, and dozens of gallows were lined up in a row. The ropes were already prepared. Everyone knew what these gallows were used for. The former chief, Isaiah's son, young Master Ferdinand, had yet to be executed. Today was the arrival of Gary's era, and it also meant that Isaiah's era had completely ended. All the possible factors that could cause unrest would be eliminated. Young Master Ferdinand was a kind and good man, just like the old chief. Compared to Gary, most orcs hoped that he could become the new chief. However, that would never happen. He would be hanged, and everyone would lose their reason to go against Gary. A golden flamingo flew toward the Fork tribe that was built in the canyon. There was a group of orcs in golden armor standing on the back of the flamingo. Have you arranged everything for tonight? The square-faced orc standing at the front asked in a deep voice. Chief, everything is arranged, a young orc in golden armor said respectfully. Very good. That square-faced orc looked at the Fork tribe below, and couldn't help but laugh. Seems like the Twilight Forest will be ours soon. All the orcs in golden armor gradually smiled too. The people on the ground quickly noticed the striking flamingo, and an orc immediately shouted, the August tribe's representative team has arrived. The music started, and the Fork tribe welcomed the August tribe's representative team with the highest standard of etiquette. Auster still likes to show off his flaming bird. At the edge of the cliff, Lex looked at the gradually descending flaming bird. Her gaze landed on the square-faced orc on the back of the bird, and her eyes narrowed slightly. Chief Goust is here. The guard captain quickly walked in and reported to Gary, who was changing his clothes. Gary let the palace maid tidy his clothes as he sneered with a slightly dark expression, and said, "He likes to be the last to arrive. His reputation is no less than mine." The guard captain lowered his head, not daring to answer. After a while, Gary asked again, "Is the banquet ready?" "Yes, as long as you say the word, the banquet will begin immediately." The guard captain said respectfully. "Let's go. Let me meet those old fellows. They used to laugh at me a lot back then. Today, I want to see how many people have to look up to me." Gary led the way to the door. Basil and the guard captain followed behind him, one on the left and one on the right. "Chief, the defenses in the inner city have been set up. No one can break into the inner city again," Basil said softly behind Gary. "All right." Gary nodded slightly. In the square in front of the palace, most of the guests were already seated. The 10 most eye-catching white jade tables were all filled with people, and there was only one empty seat left at the table in the center. Auster, who was dressed in golden armor, was very eye-catching. The chiefs or special envoys of the 10 major orc tribes were all present. Only the main character of today's conferring ceremony had yet to appear. Chief Gary of the Fork tribe has arrived. Right at this moment, accompanied by a loud announcement, Gary, who was dressed in orange armor, strode out of the palace while being escorted by his subordinates. Everyone's gazes shifted over. "Long live the chief! Long live the chief!" Accompanied by the cheers of the orc soldiers, the atmosphere gradually heated up. The nobles of the Fork tribe all stood up to welcome the arrival of Gary and the rest. Even the representatives of the various tribes at the main banquet table stood up to welcome them. Gary waved his hand at the Fork tribe's people first before smiling at the chiefs and representatives of the various tribes. "Thank you, everyone, for coming to my conferring ceremony. The Fork tribe will remember your friendship." "Chief Gary looks very spirited in the beast god armor today," Auster said to Gary with a smile. "Chief Auster's golden armor is even more eye-catching. Those who don't know might think that you are the one conferring today," Gary said to Auster with a smile. Their gazes met in the air, and there was a hint of tension. All the orc chiefs and representatives at the same table looked at this scene with interest. The Fork tribe and the August tribe did not have a harmonious relationship. During Isaiah's era, the two tribes had very different foreign policies, and the situation was very tense. However, it was said that the August tribe was behind Gary's rise to the throne. Auster's arrival at the conferring ceremony also attracted a lot of speculation. If Gary really rose to the throne with the support of the August tribe, then the balance in the Twilight Forest would be completely broken. The first and second tribes would directly decide the orc stance toward the outside world. This was also something that all the chiefs and representatives of the various tribes who were present wanted to know. However, judging from the tension between the two of them, things were probably not like what the outside world said. Gary did not immediately become Auster's loyal fan, and that made many small and medium-sized tribes who supported the Fork tribe heave a sigh of relief. Auster looked at Gary with a smile, and said, "The main character today is naturally you, Chief Gary. The Fork tribe is the second largest orc tribe. After today, it will be under your rule officially. To the Fork tribe, to the Twilight Forest, and to the entire orc race, this is a crucial moment. The Fork tribe will definitely not live up to the expectations of the various orc tribes. Together with the August tribe, we will make the orcs better," Gary said with a smile, and kept the tension in his voice. The atmosphere seemed to have eased up a lot, and the applause and cheers that had stopped for a while sounded again. "Let's start the banquet," Gary instructed the chief guard at the side, and sat down on the main seat next to Auster. "Today, all of our esteemed guests have come from afar. According to our Fork tribe's tradition, we will have the banquet first, and then the conferring ceremony." The chief guard went forward, and loudly said, "Serve the dishes, serve the dishes." The voices were passed down from mouth to mouth, and soon, palace maids in uniform walked over with trays in their hands. Is the Fork tribe's main kitchen still the same old tricks? The chief of the Blue Sky tribe asked with a smile. Many chiefs and representatives who had attended the Fork tribe's banquets before also smiled when they heard that. In order to entertain all of our esteemed guests, the chief specially invited a chef from Chaos City to host the banquet. The chief guard replied in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Oh, there's such a thing? The chief of the Blue Sky tribe was a little surprised. He then said with anticipation, "Then, I would like to see how the food prepared by this chef from Chaos City tastes like." Chapter 1560. One after another, palace maids walked over with trays in their hands. The dishes were all covered with special metal lids. This was an important method used by the kitchen to ensure that the dishes would maintain the heat and taste of freshly cooked dishes after passing through the streets. Everyone's attention was attracted. They were curious about what kind of delicious food the chef Gary had specially invited from Chaos City could make, and if he was really worthy of being called a chef. The first dish, braised chicken, the captain announced. The palace maids opened the lids on their trays at the same time, and the rich aroma of chicken soup and shiitake mushrooms wafted out in all directions. "It smells so good." All of the orcs' eyes lit up, and their faces were filled with disbelief. The palace maids placed the big bowl of braised chicken on the table gently, bowed slightly, and left. The braised chicken was only available on the 10 white jade tables. The orcs sitting in the ordinary seats couldn't help but stretch their necks out to take a look when they smelled the aroma. They wanted to know what kind of delicacy was giving off such an alluring aroma. All the nobles from the various tribes also looked at the braised chicken in the middle of the table. The golden chicken pieces were glistening with oil, and the shiitake mushrooms were embellished within. The rich aroma wafted over slowly, and made them salivate uncontrollably. "The aroma is amazing. This dish looks good, so I won't stand on ceremony." The chief of the Blue Sky tribe was the first to pick up his chopsticks. He picked up a piece of chicken with his chopsticks, and put it into his mouth. The Blue Sky tribe chief's eyes lit up as soon as the chicken entered his mouth. The broth wrapped around the chicken pieces contained the rich aroma of chicken soup and shiitake mushrooms. The wonderful taste was like a young girl's delicate fingers teasing the tip of his tongue. It sent his taste buds into a frenzy instantly, as if he had stepped into a trap of chicken soup and shiitake mushrooms. He bit into the chicken, and the meat was extremely tender. It didn't taste like the old and dry roast chicken that he usually ate. It was extremely fresh and fragrant, and left a rich aftertaste in his mouth after he swallowed it. "This is the best of the best. How can anyone in this world make chicken so delicious?" The Blue Sky chieftain's face was glowing as he praised. He had never tasted such delicious chicken before. In fact, he had never tasted such delicious food in his entire life. The beast men couldn't help but smile when they heard this. Chieftain Blue Sky was famous for being a glutton. He was definitely one of the beast men who knew how to eat. The Blue Sky tribe was ranked 8th among the tribes in the Twilight Forest. Although they were strong, they didn't have the desire to fight for territory. Their relationship with the other tribes was quite harmonious. The chief of the Blue Sky tribe, Billy, was also a frequent guest of the other tribes. It could be said that he had eaten all the tribes in the Twilight Forest. Everyone's appetite was piqued, and they all picked up their chopsticks to put the chicken in their mouths. Billy was full of praise for the braised chicken, which was exuding an alluring aroma. "Oh, what an alluring smell. Is this really chicken? Other than the fact that it's too small, I can't find any flaws." Cries of surprise rang out one after another as all of them were awed by the deliciousness of the braised chicken. The guests who couldn't taste the delicious braised chicken could only swallow their saliva as they smelled the aroma and listened to the praises. The corners of Gary's mouth curled up slightly. Although the banquet wasn't an important part of the main hall today, it had earned him a lot of face. He picked up a piece of braised chicken with his chopsticks, and put it into his mouth. The wonderful taste blossomed in his mouth, and his eyes lit up. "This chef is quite interesting. His culinary skills are much better than those old fogies in the main kitchen. I'll let him be in charge of my 3 meals in the future," Gary thought to himself. The big bowl of braised chicken was soon finished, and the second dish was also served at this moment. The second dish, red braised pork. The lid was lifted, and a big bowl of red braised pork was placed on the table. The red braised pork was a mixture of fat and lean meat. It was bright red in color, and was cut into big pieces. The skin of the meat had a crystalline texture, and the rich aroma of the meat pushed away the lingering aroma of the braised chicken. It took the absolute center position. Is this aroma going to topple the pork in my heart again? Billy couldn't wait to pick up a piece of red braised pork. The red braised pork was cut into cubes, and the skin, fat, and lean meat were very distinct. The bright red color and the aroma of the meat made his throat move uncontrollably. He opened his mouth wide and directly put the whole piece of red braised pork into his mouth. His teeth easily bit through the tough skin of the pig, and the fat under the skin melted in his mouth. He chewed carefully, and the bite force was barely there. The sweet and soft red braised pork was fat but not greasy. With a gentle bite, the sweet gravy seeped out of the meat, and the taste of the red braised pork was released perfectly at this moment. His obsession to eat meat in big mouthfuls was greatly satisfied at this moment. The rich aroma blossomed in his mouth, and made him lose himself in it uncontrollably. As a meat lover, wild boar meat was naturally one of his favorites. However, Billy had never eaten such delicious braised pork. It could remove the rank odor of the wild boar completely, and stew the meat so perfectly. It was fat but not greasy. Billy didn't even have to express his thoughts first. Chapter 1561. Kitchen number 1 was buzzing with activity, and everyone was busy. A banquet for 100 people was not too stressful for Meg. In fact, it was even less than the number of people eating at the same time in a restaurant. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly as he listened to Camilla's real-time report through his earpiece. What he was more concerned about now was where that lass Connie was, and what she was trying to do after losing contact with them. If she was with Rex, he wouldn't have to worry. He was just afraid that she was also in a state of losing contact with Rex, and the situation might get out of control if she suddenly exploded at the conferring ceremony. Apart from Auster, there were 8 other 10th-tier powerhouses from various tribes present today. It was obviously unrealistic for Connie to assassinate Gary in such a situation. Even Rex couldn't do it. The failure last night meant that the plan to rescue Ferdinand had failed unless there was another turn of events. What he had to do now was to find the source of the black fog and get rid of it as soon as possible, then bring Connie out of the Twilight Forest safely. System, do you have cephalosporin? Meg asked in his heart as he was adding insanely spicy to the spicy grilled fish. According to the recipe, there is no need to add cephalosporin to the spicy grilled fish, the system said sternly. Didn't you say that as a god of cookery, I need to have my own judgment and decisiveness? Meg pursed his lips, and said, give me a serving of cephalosporin for 100 people at 10 times the price. Ding. The cephalosporin you requested has been delivered. Note, alcohol is strictly prohibited when using cephalosporin. You will die. The system's cheerful voice sounded. All right. Meg agreed as he opened the capsules and sprinkled them on the grilled fish. Given the orc's physique, they wouldn't die from the narking cannon. It's boring to just eat meat. Chief Gary, doesn't your tribe have the #1 brewer in the Twilight Forest? Where's the good wine? Billy asked Gary with a smile. Bring the wine. The captain of the guards at the side said loudly. A group of palace maids walked over with wine jars, and filled up the big ceramic bowls in front of the orcs. The aroma of wine instantly filled the air, and everyone was intoxicated. Billy took a big gulp, and happily said, good wine. The orcs were very satisfied with the food and wine. They even forgot that they were here for Gary's conferring ceremony today. There were even some who, after drinking a few large bowls of wine, had already begun to lose the strength of the wine and were on the verge of getting drunk. People kept going up to toast Gary, but he didn't if he got drunk. The conferring ceremony today, the ceremony. Auster didn't eat much either, and only took a few sips of wine as a token gesture. It's a little numb, a little painful. Could it be that there's poison in this fish? Billy's expression froze completely, but his mind was in a mess. The pain only lasted for a moment, and what followed was a burst of numbness. As a tribal chief who loved spicy food, Billy was no stranger to spicy food. However, the sudden burst of spiciness in his mouth made him feel as if he had suddenly jumped into the sea from a small pond. The incoming waves slapped his face hard. It was as if a ball of fire had been stuffed into his mouth by a 10th-tier fire magic caster. His mouth and throat were instantly ignited. However, just as the spiciness reached the limit of his tolerance, and he was about to open his mouth and spit out the fish meat, the fresh and fragrant fish meat quietly appeared at this moment. The crispy fish skin and tender fish meat were like a beauty that had just come out of a bath of lava. They stepped on his burning throat and mouth, bringing about an extremely wonderful experience. Raw, the silence only lasted for about 5 seconds. Billy, who was originally sitting leisurely on the chair, suddenly jumped up, and then let out a furious roar into the sky. However, there was a hint of satisfaction and surprise at the end of this roar. Billy picked up the bowl of wine and gulped down a large mouthful. Then, a look of surprise appeared on his face. This spiciness is simply amazing. However, the freshness of this grilled fish is also unique. I feel like only this kind of spiciness is worthy of such a delicious grilled fish. There was no time to say anything else. Billy picked up his chopsticks and put a piece of fish meat into his mouth. Once he stopped eating, the spiciness would increase exponentially. As long as he continued to eat, his taste buds would be fooled, and it would become a kind of enjoyment. Is it really that delicious? All of the orcs looked at Billy, who couldn't stop eating, and were a little skeptical. However, some of them still picked up their chopsticks and put a piece of fish meat into their mouths. Fire spitting technique, groundhog howl, spinning on the spot, jumping repeatedly. The chiefs and nobles of the various races began their performances in the center of the venue. No pop-up window. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.